Please rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll call the meeting to order. Roll call.
Mayor Westergaard.
Yes.
Stankin.
Yes.
Frank.
Yes.
Beckman.
Yes.
Waltman.
Yep.
Note that Jensen is absent.
Just a notice to the council, we have a thank you card from Shirley Phillips. Your kindness and support mean a lot to us as we honor her memory. Thank you, Phillips family. We'll miss Shirley. Public forum. Chris, did you want to give us, you won't be here next Monday, so.
He'll be in the Caribbean. Put you all through it again next Monday if I show up.
Listen again.
Good evening, Chris Brotherton, president of the Lakeview Community Club. I know that this isn't your budget request meeting, but I won't be able to attend that next Monday night, so I hope it's okay that I give this public forum, use this public forum to make this request. The Community Club is a group of businesses and individuals working together to enhance the quality of life in Lakeview. And our volunteers and members are the heart of our success. With the number of events offered in Lakeview each year, it is easy to see that the level of community involvement we enjoy is required. Our event calendar includes Lakeshore Cleanup, the annual Sip and Sample, which this year will mark the 17th year, 4 Stone Beer concerts this year, the annual Water Carnival, which includes bingo, Chuck Luck, and the Belgian Waffle Breakfast that the Community Club runs, the Chalk the Walk event, the Merchants Spook Trail, Candyland Christmas, and the Christmas View Lighting Display. We're proud to offer so many activities every year to help Lakeview continue to be a vibrant community to live in and visit. Of course, all of these activities require a certain amount of advertising, and that is where we ask the city to partner with us. Our total advertising budget request to the city is $17,500, which is the same number I gave you last year. We understand that the finances are tight, and we do our best to get you the most bang for your buck while continuously exploring the most efficient and relevant forms of media to spend our advertising dollars with. The following is a list of the media that we use. Our Iowa Magazine, Travel Iowa Travel Guide, Western Iowa Visitor's Guide, the Denison Bulletin and Summer Fun Guide, the Denison Bulletin Review, the Fort Dodge Messenger, the Lakeview Resort, the Carroll Daily Times Herald, the Tri-County Special, the Ida County Reminder, and the radio advertising that we do is on Storm Lake radio station, Denison, Carroll, and Fort Dodge. We do a little bit of online advertising, mostly on Facebook, and those are just the costs there are mostly boosted ads, and it's for Sip and Sample and the concerts. We do a little bit of TV with Corn Belt, and again, that's mostly for the concerts and Sip and Sample. So, again, we're asking for the same amount as last year, $17,500, and thank you for your time and consideration. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
Okay, consent agenda. Any additions or corrections? If not, a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion. Second.
Roll call.
Stankin.
Yes.
Waltman.
Yes.
Beckman.
Yes.
Frank.
Yes.
Well, the timing's right. JEO, you're up.
Barely.
We're all anticipating this.
Well, we got a 120-page report, and we thought we might read through it line by line.
Perfect, we got time.
No, we're not going to do that.
We do have some handouts, Mayor, Council, thanks for having us back. So we are here to review the 60% draft review of the report. A couple housekeeping items, a reminder that these reports are part of a process that DNR and funding will require in order to get funds to help assist new projects. The other reminder is in the report itself. Some of the items are more like check boxes that we have to check. We're hitting requirements that are going to be requested for the study. And so there's a lot of information in that report, the 100 and some pages Kayla mentioned. Tonight we're going to focus on the items that you just handed out. Those are the highlight items that we'd like to have conversation around. And when I say conversation, I truly mean conversation with you, because ultimately this is for the city of Lakeview. Your operator, you guys as city making decisions on behalf of the city, we want your input. So as we're going through the slides, we would ask if there's questions, comments, at any time interject, because we want this to be a conversation, not just us presenting a bunch of information to you. And again, those slides highlight kind of the important parts of where you're headed for what it looks like for future potential projects.
Yep, I think that covered it.
Thank you.
So we'll just go through the slides. We've made reference to page numbers in the report. So if you're curious about some of the, some more detail about population projections or water quality or something like that, you can just refer to the study, but we will be just rolling through the slides here. So Leah, and I'm Caleb, so we'll be, I don't know what to do with this pillar.
Move it forward.
Just stand in front of it.
Yeah, move it forward.
Push it closer to us.
Oh, no, that pillar. Sure.
Yeah.
You can move this too. There you go. You take that.
Okay.
You get the podium, Leah. You start.
Ready?
Yeah.
Ready to
We're
go.
ready to roll.
Okay, I'm going to kick it off with population. So on slide 2, we have the historical population of the city of Lakeview. So you can see in that navy line on the graph, that's your population up to the year 2020. And we use our historical population to project the future population, in this case to year 2045. And then we will use that as our design year to determine a projected flow. And we'll use that projected flow for our designs of any improvements. So in table 2-2.
Question about
Yeah.
that. Is this a census population?
Yes.
Okay, so how do we take into consideration our seasonal folks? Is that something you can consider in your
That's a
flow?
great question.
Yep. So we'll take the population number just on a strict per capita basis, and then we take water use and divide it by that. So that's the best number we have to work with. We did have some conversations about, what the seasonal flow is. And then as we design the alternatives, we build a little bit of buffer capacity to account for that.
So would you figure how much for population-wise during our summer months?
What did we say, Teresa? I think it was a couple hundred is what we looked at.
Well, I mean, that doesn't include the visitors that we have. We're talking about, the number of homes that we have that bring in, the flow, and then we compared the flow that we have with not just, population, but, the number of households and different things, the number of meters that we have. So, I mean, there was kind of a calculation, we were all part of,
A lot of it would probably been based off of what our water MORs are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can definitely see, I don't know what page it is.
It's coming up. We're gonna cover the usage,
Yeah.
and you'll be able to see the
That's where they're
spike.
getting some of that design capability off of.
Yep, so we end up basing it off the true number or amount of water produced at the wells. That's what we base it on. Great question.
So, table 2-2, you can see a couple different growth models that we developed just to project that future population. We ended up going with the green line, or the low growth rate, just based on the growth in past years. That ends up at a future population for 2045 of 1,261. So, moving on to page 3, we have our water use. So figure 2-3 on the right, you can see the daily water data that you guys provided for us. So that's 2019 to 2024. You can see the ebbs and flows in that graph. Typically the summer months have more water demand than the winter months. That's very standard. You can see on the left we have specifics. So the average of all that data in the summer months is almost double the average gallons per day in the winter months, and that reflects that increased population that we talked about earlier. And table 2-3 in the top left corner, we have just the different water users by category listed out. So, slide 4, water use and projections. We have the summary of all that historical water data that you guys gave us, and that leads to an average gallons per day of about 160,000, a maximum day of 480,000. And we use that data along with our projected population to project future water use, which we'll use to design all our alternatives. So
these numbers to keep in mind as we look forward to the alternatives based on DNR criteria. Each of these values has a particular use. So average day is the number that we look at when we're talking about storage. Maximum day is the number that we're looking at when we think about treatment capacity. And then peak hour is the number that we're going to think about when we're talking about pumping capacity. So each of those is prescribed by the DNR to evaluate it in a certain way, and so that's how those numbers kind of fall out. So that 125 GPM, or 180,000 gallons, average day, we're thinking about storage. Maximum day of 380 gallons per minute, or 546,000 gallons per day, that's our treatment number, and then pumping capacity should be around 500 gallons per minute. So that's how those shake out.
okay. So that's our projected water use. Moving on to slide 5. We have our water loss evaluation. So you can see table 2-8, we have water produced versus water sold. On the left, water produced at the wells in your gallons, and then we compare that to the water sold to your users. So any difference in that value is our water lost, or unaccounted for water. You can see with 2022 up to 2024, there's an average of 42%. That is quite a bit higher than we typically see. There are several possible sources that we have listed. The first being meter inaccuracy. So we talked about at the kickoff meeting, hard water, you're replacing those water meters very regularly. If there's an inaccurate reading there, that could be a factor. And then moving on to unmetered users or unread meters. So specifically the water salesman is likely a large factor, but the splash pad or any other unread meters could also be a contributor there. And then your standard water main leaks can lead to that, and any backwash water for the treatment plant cleaning as well. So,
how do you determine what's the average water loss? How do you come up with that number?
So that's from other communities that we work with and kind of the standard that we see, which is common. In Iowa and the Midwest specifically, we look for about that 15 to 20% is where we kind of like to live in that world, that we're okay with that. Out on the West Coast, they're very conservative. They like see 5%, which is really getting taxed. As you can see there, you know, we would consider anything over that 25 to 30 to start to really be pushing it. And at that 42%, that's pretty significant. You know, 42% of what is coming out of those wells is not necessarily being billed for. And when I say that, I don't mean like it's being stolen. It's just where is that water going that we're not being able to account for that.
What can you explain? I don't know what a water salesman is.
That's on the fire station.
Where they drop
okay.
the quarters.
Yeah, that's unmetered.
Okay. Sorry.
no problem. Okay. Moving on to slide 6, we have our existing water supply. So as you're probably aware, you have 2 wells, well number 3 at the park, well number 4 at the trail. Well number 3 is currently on standby as it's letting sand into the system, which we don't like, so it's on standby, and we're using well number 4 as our primary source of water. Both wells are about 100 feet in depth. currently no backup power at either well, which is a concern. So that's something we'll recommend and talk about later on. But like we said, mainly well number 4 is our primary source of water.
I'll take the next couple of slides. And before I start on slide 7 about water quality, I just want to say, like, as we've been doing this study, Teresa and Kay and Jason have been extremely responsive and helpful in pulling all the information together. So I want to just say thank you for that. So we asked Jason, hey, can we get some water quality samples? And he was right on it. We got those sent into the lab. That helped us understand the dynamics of the system and what might be needed for a potential treatment plan. So kudos to them for that. So all the water quality there shown on page 7, we've got each of the parameters listed, the number from well 3, from well 4, and then on the right hand side it's showing the EPA limit. So when it says SMCL, that's supplementary or secondary maximum contaminant limit, so that's a recommendation by the EPA. If it says MCL, that's a hard limit, it cannot go over that. So for example, nitrate, the raw nitrate from well number 3 is highlighted in red at 12.9. That is above the maximum contaminant limit of 10. So that water can't just be pumped directly into the system. That's why your treatment plant has an ion exchange unit to reduce those nitrate levels down to a level that's below that MCL. So I won't go through those in detail. The treatment plant is designed to remove nitrates, iron and manganese, and then also you have a contaminant in your raw water called tetrachloroethylene, or PCE. I don't know where the abbreviation comes from, but it's PCE. And so the system removes those through 3 different processes. And what kind of in conversations with Jason and with some treatment plant manufacturers and some of our internal staff, it seems that as the water goes through the aerator, which is needed to get the PCE out, it's causing that hardness to turn into a precipitate. So it's building up in the water meters, it's building up in the high service pumps, it's building up in the clear well, and causing maintenance problems. But it is effectively removing the PCE, which is needed because of the wells. One positive trend that we saw in the water quality, as we look at the historical data, is that the raw nitrate concentrations have been coming down over time. And I want to say that's on a good effort by the council and by the city to take action on developing a wellhead protection program, a source water protection program, and that has, I think, had some effect in seeing those nitrate levels come down. Moving on to slide 8. So as we look at the water treatment plant, there's 3 pictures there. The one kind of on the upper left is a picture of the existing media. Jason was replacing that at the time of our tour, and then the other two are showing the ion exchange and the pressure filter units. The treatment plant was expanded in 2001. Like I said, designed to remove nitrates, iron, manganese, and PCE. It's not designed to remove that hardness from the water. That's where it's kind of building up in that aerator. Capacity of the treatment plant is 350 gallons per minute. That's limited by the high service pumps and the filters, the size of the filters themselves. The interior is in fair condition, we thought. The piping is showing some age, needs to be recoated. The media was recently replaced. Jason got us corrected on that one. And the control system is old. It was built in 2001. Technology has changed enough that it's no longer able to be updated. But the building itself is in good shape. The clear well is in good shape, aside from some mineral buildup inside of that. A couple other things we've noticed on the treatment plant: there's no backup power, and only one high service pump can operate at a time. That's partly due to the system that it's pumping into, but also partly due to the control and electrical service. All right, moving on to slide 9. So talked about water quality, talked about treatment. Now we're talking about distribution and storage. The graphic there at the bottom is a screenshot from our water modeling software where we're showing the different pressures in the part of the town. So the green on the upper left is the lower pressures, white and blue and dark blue, that kind of the pressures are increasing as you kind of head towards the west. You're all aware there's lower pressures in the west side of town as the elevation goes up. And it's about 35 PSI. And so when we look at the DNR regulations, 35 PSI is what they say is the recommended minimum pressure during a normal operating time. It's not a hard and fast rule. The lower limit is 20 PSI. So if you drop below 20, that's where a boil order would need to be issued. If you drop below 35, it's not desirable, but it's also not a health risk. One thing that we as we look at those pressures, the one thing it does is you have to keep Jason keeps the tower high so that you're keeping that pressure up towards that 30-35 PSI range. The tower is nominally 300,000 gallons worth of storage, but you can't bring it down low to use all of that storage because of the pressure constraints, if that makes sense. All right, so you have to keep the water up to keep the pressures up. If the water level drops, then that pressure level is also going to drop. So typically not a problem. However, in the situation that maybe a high service pump's out of service, or you're seeing a peak demand, or there's a line break or a big fire, that pressure is going to cause issues in the upper parts of the system as that pressure comes down. So we say it's reducing the effective storage of the tower is how we're. Any questions on that? A little bit. I don't know if I explained it that well. All right. Other than that, based on the inspection reports, the tower's in good condition, structurally wise and paint wise. So we've talked about the existing system. Any questions before we move on to the need for a project and some of the alternatives that we're proposing?
I kind of have a question.
Yeah, Dave.
You talked about the water tower when it goes down and it's in a high pressure pump. There's not a pump at the water tower, correct?
No.
But there's a high pressure pump at our water treatment facility, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So what does that high pressure pump do at the water treatment facility?
So the high pressure pump is going to take the water after it's treated. It goes through iron manganese filters, ion exchange, aerator, and then it falls to a clear well.
Okay.
So it's got, I don't know, 15,000 gallons or so. So then the water's pumped out of there and pushed into the top of the tower.
So, okay, so then it goes back to the tower.
Yep.
And then the tower creates its own.
The tower is what's
Gravity
normally
fed.
supplying that water
Okay.
to the system. Yep.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? So slide 10, here's where we go over kind of as we assess the condition of things, compared it to the DNR standards. There's kind of 5 aims that we're going for as we see the need for a project. First one is to increase reliability. So right now only one well is being used because the second well is pumping sand, which can cause maintenance issues, wear and tear on the pumps and other equipment. And then there's no backup power. So whether that be at the wells or at the treatment plant, we want to create a reliable condition. I mean, it's really cold tonight, but fortunately there's no precipitation, so power seems to be reliable. But if there were a long extended outage, we want to be able to create resilience in the system to be able to handle that. Second need for a project is increased system pressures. So this would increase the potential for additional development on the west side of town, and also just operability and fire flow in those areas. Item number 3 is to increase capacity to meet the projected demands. So we talked about the projected maximum day being around 380 gallons per minute. Current capacity of the treatment plant is around 350. So as we're looking to potentially increase that capacity, it also opens up potential more development and ability to supply water to users in the system. Item number 4 is to replace aging infrastructure. This could be the need for maintenance at the plant, whether that be the piping, the units themselves. And then finally, number 5 is just to address water quality. The hardness in the system has caused maintenance problems. Jason said to replace pumps. There's buildup in the clear well, there's buildup in the water meters. And so looking at a treatment plant that can remove that hardness can reduce the maintenance required for the system. So those are, as we go into the next slide where we talk about the different alternatives, those are kind of
back up here a second.
Yep.
This increase in system pressure, what would be the goal in a perfect world?
What pressure would you try and achieve? So right now it's sitting right at about that 35. I think we'd like to see 35 PSI at the tower's low water level. So basically you're raising the tower by about 30 feet, I think is what we would be looking at there. So 30 feet is about 10 to 15, between 10 and 15 PSI.
Okay, so in a system, our system is relatively old, which you've seen. What kind of problems do you have if we raise this up another 30 And you said, what was the pressure again?
So you're increasing it by 12 or 13 PSI.
So about 47, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
What kind of effect does that have on our older lines?
So right now, pressure in the lower parts of town are maybe 55, 60 PSI. So those would be get up to 75, which it may initially create some issues. Maybe you'll see a break or you'll see a little bit more leakage. But in the long term, 75 PSI is not an incredibly high pressure. We start to get concerned when it's above 100 PSI. All your water system components are going to be designed to hit 125 PSI, although 100 is kind of the more comfortable.
Are you
limit.
talking more along the lines of single service lines?
Yes.
So individual service lines, would there be, I guess,
There shouldn't be, but there might be, depending on the age of it or the condition of it.
And plumbing
And-
becomes the internal plumbing in homes as you increase that pressure potentially. If they were used to, you know, that lower pressure and you see that increase, hot water heaters, leaky faucets, those kinds of things do show up if you increase that pressure. 12 to 13 PSI is not a huge increase. If we were more in that 20 to 30 PSI change, that's where I'd be more concerned about some homes plumbing, seeing those, just because they've been used to this lower pressure, so something might not have been super tight, but it gets away with it at 30 PSI compared to 50 PSI or 60 PSI.
And with the elevation change in our town, how are we going to, is that, you know, we got the west side of town that's higher elevated, so that's why we need to keep the water tower more full to keep as much pressure up there.
Yeah.
So we raise the pressure to help them get more pressure, but, and then it raised the pressure and everything else. How do you keep them pressures equalized in the elevation change of the town? Is that something you're gonna talk about?
So, yep, that's
Okay.
a great question. There's two ways of doing it. One, that's the tower, and one that would be a separate pressure zone.
Okay.
So there's two ways, and we'll talk about that. Leah will introduce the alternatives and go through the first couple ones.
Great questions, by the way. Okay, so we've evaluated our existing system, we found some needs for some improvements, and we've come up with a list of alternatives to propose to you guys. So you can see on slide 11 and 12, they're split up into different categories. So we have water supply improvements, water treatment improvements, water pressure improvements, and some smaller supplementary alternatives as well. So I'm just gonna go through the list quick, and then we'll talk about them in more detail as we go. So, water supply improvements. First one, we have inspection, rehab, and generator for well number 4. We also have a new supply well. We have 2 different options there based on some different aquifers in the area. Moving on to water treatment improvements. You can renovate the existing plant, or we can start new with a reverse osmosis plant. Water pressure improvements, we've talked about elevating the existing storage tank. We can do a full replacement of the tower. We can add a booster pump station, which we'll talk about in more detail, and then a water main installation on the north side of town along Highway 175. And then we have some, a new water salesman and water meter replacements and fire hydrant replacements as well.
Can I ask you a question about
Yeah.
water supply improvements on way back on the first one when you said inspection, rehab, and generator for well 1? What do you mean by rehab? Can you rehab that well? Or go through that well and update that existing well? Is
They're
that what you're
talking well 4, the one that we use, well 3 would go away.
Great, so well 4 is what we're currently using today?
Correct.
So what do they mean by rehab is what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I'll get into that. Great leading question. So,
It's gonna lead into the next question,
yeah,
where the one where we're getting the sand, is there a rehab possibility for that as well?
great question.
Based on the conversations with Derek, the sergeant, the well driller, I don't think we felt like it was possible, so.
Okay,
It's gonna cost us as much to do it as it would put a new one.
right, I just,
Yeah.
when you put that
Yep.
stuff in front of us that says rehab,
Yep,
I gotta be able to explain to the general,
right,
public,
yep.
why aren't you rehabbing this one if you're rehabbing that one? That's why I wanted to know that question.
So there's 2 parts to the well. There's the the actual pipe, what we call the casing and the screen, and then outside of that, they put gravel patch in there. So we think what happened with well 3 is when they sized the gravel pack, when they grabbed the sample, they didn't see the sugar sand in it. And so that gravel pack is what would need to be corrected, but you can't correct that.
Okay.
You can only correct the casing and screen.
That's a great explanation, thank you
Yep.
for that.
Yep.
So, slide 13, we have inspection, rehab, and generator for well number 4. So like we discussed earlier, well number 4 is your main source of water. Well number 3 on standby, we propose it to be cleaned and inspected. Hasn't been inspected since well number 3 was put on standby. And after that inspection, we anticipate a need for a pump and column pipe replacement, possibly a well lining, and we recommend adding a generator as well for backup power or any electrical outages. And that just improves the reliability of your water supply, and that estimated opinion of cost is about $300,000, $400,000. And that will go along with the new supply wells that Caleb will talk about.
What's the 2,000 annual increase in operating and maintenance costs? Is that related to like the generator costs and that type of stuff? Okay.
Generator testing and fueling. So the goal of this report is not just to give the council and the city an idea of what can be done to make the system more reliable for the next 20 to 30 years, but also to make the city eligible for funding.
Okay.
So one of the things that we consider, and this is a draft report and we're continuing to look at these things, is we'll do a life cycle cost analysis where we say, okay, alternative 1, it's this much cost up front and it has this much ongoing cost, and so we'll roll that into a life cycle cost analysis. So that's where those numbers come from. If you don't see the O&M, it means it's still in progress.
Okay.
And not to steal any thunder here on the next slide, but just.
You want to take this one?
No, I know, but in order of operations of how things would go, is ideally, the next slide, slide 14, would happen first, before slide 1 happens, and that gets you a new water supply that is up to standard, it's brand new, we trust it, it's reliable, and then at that time, we take well 4 down to do the repairs and the rehab, so that we have, because like right now we can't go do that because well 3 would cause all sorts of headaches while well 4 is down to do that rehab. So it would be the new water supply well first, and then you would go rehab 4, look at 4, because 1993 was when 4 was put in, so we'd want to get a good look at that, and we'd want to protect your asset,
Right.
do minimal. When I say minimal, $400,000 is not minimal, but put the effort in to save that for hopefully another 20, 30 years to assist with well number, call it 5, the proposed future well.
Yeah. Okay, I'll keep the next couple ones. So there's 2 options for a new supply well. So the existing wells are drilled into the alluvial aquifer is what we call it. So there's, shallow soils, and then it's sands and gravels that are kind of hydraulically connected to the lake. And so option 2 would tap into that same aquifer. So we've got it estimated about 110 feet deep. The location for that is going to be dependent on a test well program or a sampling program, and then we also have to meet setbacks that are prescribed by the DNR. So a certain distance away from the lake, certain distance from other wells, certain distance from they have a whole list of it. So, but this one would be a new submersible well, same style as the existing. It's possible it could fit on city's existing land. We'll just have to look and see what the setbacks would be for that. And so you're talking a new well, a generator at that well, and then depending on the location, there may be another well building or a pit with some valves in it. So we kind of have 2 items here on the opinion of probable cost. The first one is $2.8 million, and that one includes the second item, $1.4 million for a well and transmission main. Because we don't know exactly where it's going to go, I wanted to include that transmission main number, so it's about 2 miles of transmission main that may or may not be necessary, depending on the results of the test well program. But I wanted to include that. So if, let's say, a suitable site were to be found near the existing water treatment plant or in the park where the existing well number 3 is, then that transmission main cost would go away.
Okay, so I wanna make sure I understood that right.
Yep,
The 1.4 is included in the 2.8?
correct.
So what's the difference between the 1.4 and the 2.8?
So
The 2.8 is just another 10,000 feet of transmission line?
the 2.8 number includes the new well, the casing, the screen, the pump, the valves, the backup generator, all of that, so that's the well construction. So,
Along
yeah,
with 10,000 feet
of transmission main, along with, yep. So if you were to say, we can put it in the city park, then this alternative would now cost approximately 1.4, half, right? 2.8 minus 1.4. But it's, if you look at.
So the 1.4
page eight,
basically is 10,000 feet of transmission main, that's
Correct.
included in the 2.8?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, yep. Good
How
clarification.
far away from the existing wells, you know, that are with the sand, how far away do you have to get from them to?
Yep. So, based on the DNR classification of your wells as what's called a shallow well, so it's how much kind of clay is over the top. I believe the number is 400 feet, I think is the distance. And then the city has to maintain what they call 200 feet of legal control around the well. There's a number of ways of accomplishing that, but, so 400 feet from an existing well, active well. So if well 3 were to be decommissioned and taken out of service, you could drill a well 50 feet away from it because it's no longer active.
And in this case, where the sand is in that one, that's more of a construction issue that we could possibly
Yep,
eliminate in a new well 50 feet from there?
correct, yeah, so you go through the process where you'd hire a well driller, you competitively bid it, they drill a hole and they grab an aquifer sample and you'd run tests on it, and then design a screen and gravel pack that keeps that sand from moving into the well.
And the other issues we got, you know, with our hard water here in town and that, wouldn't it be better off if we could distance ourselves from what we've presently got so that we can get into a different aquifer or whatever?
Yep, so alternative WS3 is exactly that.
Okay.
So, based on our understanding of the aquifers in the area and reviewing, I would say our well construction reports, the city of Lakeview sits at a little bit of there's a couple different aquifers that are here. So you've got the shallow sands and gravels, and below that there's a limestone layer, and then there's also below that there's a Dakota aquifer. So those are different water qualities. Typically you don't see the nitrates, but you can see hardness in it, and it may just depend on what that aquifer is yielding, if it's going to have less hardness than the current one. The thing that may be an advantage to moving towards this Dakota aquifer is that you would likely not have the tetrachloroethylene that's present in the alluvial aquifers. So that would be the contaminant that would probably be the most significant change from what you're seeing today. Does
So
that
do
make sense?
do you have to go much deeper than if we go to this other out?
Yeah, 300 feet is about what I was looking at and seeing,
That's,
to get into some limestone.
200 more feet than what
200
we
more
got now.
feet.
yeah, so,
So the well cost is about $1.8 million is what we have in that, and then 1.4 transmission rate.
If we go, I know that's WS3,
Yep,
if that's an option, I know it's more cost, but is
Yep.
the quality of the water better and the treatment cost less than?
it can be, so you would not have to remove the PCE from it. But in this case, so we have one Dakota well listed here, you would need to have 2 wells. One primary and one some backup. Or you'd have to still have the existing PCE removal because your well number 4 has that.
Right, but,
Yep.
but the primary one's the one we're using all the time.
You'd have to have it for both.
You still have to have the equipment, but
Oh, could you kind of send water through one and kind
Right.
of turn off the one? It's not preferable. I think Jason would have it'd be tough to switch between the two.
It would be the idea to blend the water, right?
But you can blend
Yeah.
the water, also an option. So you're kind of running both at the same time to get but then you still have to do the PCE removal. So one thing we're still having some conversations with our with the manufacturers for the treatment equipment. And this is something we can look at and flesh out more based on the feedback and comments we're getting of like, if we're gonna go down the path of selecting a new aquifer, what's that cost for 2 new wells and then a treatment alternative that that doesn't have the PCE treatment in it. So that would be something that we can definitely do
Okay, so
and look at.
if we did the new deeper well
Yep.
and got to that new aquifer, and now we have the primary well up and running, can we
Yep.
go to the other existing well that we're using today and drill it deeper to get to that?
You could drill a replacement well next to it, yes.
That's
But
still the same.
you couldn't reuse anything from that well,
Okay.
but you could reuse the transmission main, and you've got the property that's there. You know, you'd have to look at current setbacks.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out if that
Yep.
would help reduce the cost of that second well.
Correct,
That's
you'd still
what-
have the 1.8 to drill the new well, and put in the new pitless unit, and electrical and controls.
Well, this one says 3.1.
Well, minus the 1.4 for the transmission main.
Okay, okay.
Yep,
So if you would move your well, would we get away from that sand? I'm just thinking of the other one, if we
Yep.
went deeper, or?
yes, yep.
And how
Because you'd be
deep would you-
pulling 300 feet,
Okay,
yep,
still.
so you'd be pulling from a different aquifer, yeah.
And I think I asked you this the last
Yep.
time, but I can't remember, I'm getting old.
So, okay,
We have open bodies of water
yep,
that are owned by the state.
yep.
I'm thinking of Lake Arrow,
Arrowhead
right down here.
Yeah,
Is there possibilities to draw the water out of that for a well, for water supply and treat it?
it's a lot more expensive,
It is more expensive.
yeah, because of so they treat that as a surface water, and so then you have to, there's a lot stricter requirements for the treatment technology that you use, the kind of disinfection that's required. So that cost goes up significantly, and operation is a lot more as well.
Okay, this
Yep.
was,
Yeah, in a sense, your current wells are pulling their water
from there, filtered,
filtered from there.
yeah, to the ground.
It's, yeah,
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
sort of.
Are you familiar with Wall Lake? I mean, like their water over there isn't near as hard as ours is here. They're 5 miles away. Is their wells deeper or they're?
I'm not
You might not be
entirely familiar with
theirs.
theirs. I know when we were evaluating the different wells, we took a look at the rural water, has some wells that are
Yeah,
just
right
south of
south
here.
of town here, yeah.
And their wells are pulling from a similar aquifer to yours. They're from the shallow aquifer adjacent to kind of some surface water recharge points. But, so it's similar aquifer for them, but I couldn't speak to Wall Lake.
And keep in mind, part of the hardness that we're seeing is part of the treatment process right now.
Yeah.
And maybe elaborate on that. You kind of briefly mentioned it earlier when you were talking about the
Right.
process, but
Yeah.
we're making it come out in the
Correct.
treatment process.
So, all right.
So a different water treatment facility could change the hardness of our water
Correct.
if we upgrade that facility.
So one of the options would be to go to a reverse osmosis facility, and that's going to remove the hardness from it. So right now, your hardness is about 400 to 500 milligrams per liter, which is pretty hard water. And normally that hardness stays in the water, right? It doesn't move. But what's happening right now is you have to aerate the water, which, follow me here, the pH goes up when you aerate it because the CO2 leaves. And that is causing that hardness to turn into particulate. And then it's starting to come out in your system. So if you didn't have to aerate, the hardness might be staying in the water, but because you have to aerate, it's coming out in the system.
And we're aerating again to eliminate nitrates?
And
The
eliminate
PCE.
PCE. Yep.
That,
But-
whatever that long word that I can't pronounce.
Tetrachloroethylene.
Yeah, that one.
Show off.
That one.
Sorry.
Well, if you want to measure your operator, he should know that word.
Yeah.
So how many, I'm trying to follow the process though.
Yep.
How many test wells would you do in different areas, or you just doing one and say, we're going, this is where we're
How much
going?
money you wanna spend, Whitey?
Well, water's pretty important,
Yeah.
and so we wanna do it right, that's all. we're
Correct, yeah, I agree.
You're gonna do as many as it takes to get the right water quality. So there's a couple steps to it. So the first step would be to identify some wells in the area of people who might be willing to let you sample their well. So if you've got a good relationship with a private well, you can have them pump it, and you can take a 13 parameter sample for a couple $100. and see what the water quality is there. Does it have nitrates? Does it have PCE? So you can go through and do some water quality sampling. The next step would be to get a well driller on board and to actually drill an actual hole and see what formation is there. And if the formation is good, then you can put in a small diameter well and pump it and see what happens. Does it supply enough water? Does it supply enough water in a good quality? So there's a whole process to it. And sometimes you can get lucky on your first try. Other times you can go 4, 5, 6 holes to figure out where the good water is. So it can be a process.
So what, right now, we're not in as bad a drought right there, but does that have some effect on your drilling that you could get a more accurate or less accurate reading on it because of the drought?
It'd give you an idea of what the water, like, so if we're in kind of a drought condition and you're drilling it, that's what you would expect during those same drought conditions. If you were to leave the drought condition, maybe the water's gonna get a little bit better. Dakota is less susceptible to drought. It doesn't change as much during a drought condition, but an alluvial well will fluctuate a little bit more. So, yes, it's good to know, it's kind of good for context, but it doesn't have a direct impact on the thing.
So this Dakota aquifer is that close to us, or?
It's deeper, it's farther away in that sense, but the Dakota does underlie this area.
Okay.
Kind of the buried sands and gravels, some shale, and then the Dakota's gonna sit underneath that.
So, if the rural water plant, which is 3 miles from us, basically, not even, they're out of the same aquifer as us, why do they not have the water quality issues that we have?
As far as PCE or nitrates?
Yeah,
My understanding is the PCE is due to the dry cleaner that was in the area.
the dry cleaner?
I think that's, going back, I think there, at some point, or maybe it wasn't a dry cleaner, at some point there was a facility that was using an inorganic chemical, and they had a well of some kind, and that the inorganic chemical went back into the aquifer. Contaminated the aquifer.
But they're
It's
coming
been
out of the
since-
same aquifer.
But they're
They're
farther
farther away.
away. So their recharge distance, their groundwater map, the travel time is less, or is longer, sorry, than your travel time to whatever the source of that contamination is.
Dilution's a solution.
Contamination stay with us.
Until it's gone.
And aquifers can be hard to understand as far as, you can literally find good water, when I say good water, quantity, when you're doing a test well here, and you can go 300 feet away and do a test well to the same depth and find very minimal water quantity. So think of it like veins, and you're guessing, right? Like it's underground, so you don't know exactly where. So it's where it is kind of, you're poking and hoping a little bit that you hit those, and those veins can carry different, parameters of what you're seeing in the water as well in those individual veins. But part of that test well program is, to Caleb's point, first you have to get the IDNR map that says where you're putting this test well is in an area that they approve, and so it's meeting all these setbacks and requirements. And then, when you do that test well, if you get lucky, you might not get any water or good quality water at all. So then you would move on to your next spot. But let's say you did on the very first one, then what you can do is once you know that you have a good test well, as long as you abandon it correctly, because that one was just temporary, that was just getting us the water to see how much we can pump, how hard we can pump it, watch the drawdown as we're pumping it to make sure we're not impacting that aquifer too much, and then the quality of the water, let's say all those were good, then you can put an actual production well in within 50 feet of that test well. So you're feeling good about, like, we're gonna hit that aquifer again. So that's part of that process on the test well program, and we call them programs because there have been communities that we work with that drill a lot of test holes, and again, sometimes it's like everything says it should be here and it's not here, or the quality's not there, or the quantity.
What's the typical cost of a test well?
So a test hole is, I've been done one too recently, I'd say around 20,000.
To go to the Dakota, I would
Dakota.
say you're probably pushing 40, and Sergeant would be able to give you a better idea.
Okay.
Have you had any test wells done recently?
We didn't go to the Dakota, we went 115 feet and our test well cost us 31.
So it's kind of that balance of, okay, we can go to the alluvial, we know there's water there, but we also know it has some required treatment technologies to it.
You're spending 31 to go to 150, basically, or you spend 40 and go to the 300 and see if we get, invest a little bit up front to make sure we're doing the things right. I don't know if that's the right.
Off the top of the head, don't hold me
Let's say it's double the cost hypothetically.
Yeah.
My point is, we're investing this, let's not cut corners to make sure we get the best water quality for our city for the long run. And make-
Okay, so with that said, we'll skip to slide number 17.
Yeah.
So,
16 and
16,
17 are
17.
our treatment plant alternative.
so we do those alternatives, then can we use, I mean, that would help us on the test drilling. Because if we run and go 100 feet
Yeah.
for that, what was it, the
Alluvial.
The alluvial?
Yeah,
yeah, that one.
yeah,
Splash pad.
That plant is designed to treat that one, right?
correct.
Okay,
And what we can do, and I think what I'm hearing is, we could basically set up two kind of paths, if you will, right? Two options. One would be to drill one new alluvial well, pair it with the correct treatment processes, and let's see what the life cycle cost of that is. The operation, the maintenance, that sort of thing. And then the other path would be, let's do a more extensive test well program. Let's look for a Dakota aquifer well, pair that up with the correct treatment process, and let's see what that life cycle cost is. Because there may be more upfront costs, as you said, but it may pan out in the long term if you don't have to do an additional treatment process.
Well, and one of the things that, and they kind of touched on it a little bit, but one of the issues you have with your hardness and what you're seeing in your calcium buildup is when you put the water through the aerator, it's stripping, it's basically concentrating the calcium in there, or the hardness of it, so that when it's coming out and it's getting distributed out to the system, that's the reason why we're getting meters that are plugged up. We're getting people with, a lot of calcium issues. That's why the aerator did what it did, at the end of the day. And now that the aerator's clean, we're probably, because there wasn't a lot of the stuff going through it, now that the aerator is clean, we're even pushing probably even more out to the system, that was not really going out there before, because the aerator is in a sense plugged by all of the buildup. But we're putting that out into the system, so that's not helping us in the long term. Matter of fact, if we have to keep taking and pulling the PCE, the long word I can't say, out of the system, then that's still gonna concentrate everything up. That's kind of why, what are the alternatives to get away from that? And that would be, one of the reasons why they're here.
So the two alternatives that we've put forward for treatment, so WT1, slide 16, this would be to renovate the existing water treatment plant. So this is sticking with the same treatment processes that are in place. This is not resolving the hardness issue. I just want to put this kind of out there as a baseline understanding for what the cost could be. So this includes new electrical and controls, chemical feed, backup generator. It's going to rehabilitate the existing piping and filters. It also includes a building addition for additional capacity to the treatment plant, replacing the high service pumps as needed. And then the big one on this is, as you're renovating the plant, you have to have a temporary plant, because you can't be working on one while it's still going. That's for heart surgeons, not for civil engineers. So the opinion of probable cost for that one is $6.4 million, which I understand is a large number.
And that's not removing the buildup.
Yeah, correct. And then WT2 is a reverse osmosis plant. So this is starting new. This is north of the existing treatment plant. You utilize a lot of the same, transmission mains. And this is going to remove iron, manganese, nitrate, PCE, as well as hardness. and then new clear well, high surface pumps and discharge piping. And in this case, basically you'd run one well to one treatment kind of train is what we would call it, one unit, and the other well to the other unit, so you can get your water quality dialed in. And I'm suspicious of the numbers.
Yeah, they're not right.
I was gonna say, same numbers.
They're not the
They're
same.
not the same. What is it from our report?
Well, it's 2.8.
So,
That's all right.
I'll ask a question. With the EPA, if they come out here, Jason, what was that you talking about, the
The chloride?
Chloral alkaline substances?
Yeah, I think that's
That's even worse than PCE.
Right.
So would that, we'd wanna try to clear that up, or can we clear that up?
Are we talking about the chloride that we're getting hit on the wastewater side?
Yeah.
Is that where you're going with it?
That, yeah, and.
The RO system, you're still gonna have some of the chloride that we currently have. It's probably gonna cut it, what, by 55%? Somewhere in there,
So
going
right
from
now,
an
our
RO.
this is like 450, you
Yeah.
target 100.
So, would it help us on our chloride compliance on the backside with what the DNR and EPA is doing us on the wastewater side? Absolutely, it would assist us. Is it gonna solve the issue? No. How we solve that issue is residents get rid of their softeners in their houses, and I don't know how you're gonna enforce that.
No, you're not gonna have, that's not gonna happen.
No, that's not
They
right.
don't
But
need to
is it
soften
gonna
as
help
much.
us and make it so they don't have to soften as much in their house? Absolutely. It's gonna help us tenfold both sides. On the other hand, you know, and I probably shouldn't say this on camera, but going into our RO plant is gonna create a heck of a lot more work for me and my guys. It is harder to run an RO plant than what we currently have. Is it the best option for the community? Unfortunately, I think so. What does that mean? It means my boys and myself have to step up and do our jobs better. But it's gonna help us on the chloride aspect of it. To answer your original question, is it gonna solve it? No.
So, do you think the EPA is gonna come down with some other strange things that you have to comply with?
Yes. Do we know what they are? No. Are they gonna throw a dart at the wall and make something up like they have previously? Yes.
Well, you know, cause we get a new plant or whatever we decide to do with it, all at once we gotta add on to something. You know, for small communities, this is a big
Well, we
item.
had to make that decision on the sewer plant too, you know?
Yeah.
You know, at some point, you have to,
It-
you know, you can't wait on all the darts to get thrown at the dartboard.
Well, as long as I've been here, we've always tried to develop a 40-year plan,
Yeah.
where it came to with the water now, electricity sometimes, because, you know, we're not gonna get any smaller, I truly believe that, so we've gotta be able to make a decision that's gonna, yeah, it's gonna cost us, but we gotta get the most bang for the buck, as Dale was saying, so.
And I will give my recommendation, as much as I hate to say this. The Dakota Aquifer is huge. We're not gonna run out of water. It is a little bit harder to treat depending on where we get into it. In my
I thought they
opinion,
said it was easier to treat.
it depends on where you get into the aquifer on
So we
it.
got one guy telling us it's harder, one guy telling us it's easier.
So depending on where you
I tried to hedge my
get,
answer a little bit more than that, maybe I didn't quite enough. The Dakota won't have nitrates, but the hardness, I think, is what we're
the hardness is
talking
where
about.
it's gonna get us. The deeper you go, typically the harder it is.
So you wouldn't,
It's different treatment.
a little bit, so, I don't have the graphic in front of me, so a reverse osmosis treatment plant is gonna have filters and then the RO unit. Your current has filters and then ion exchange, so you're swapping the ion exchange unit for an RO unit, essentially is what you're doing, so I think that's the, kind of what makes it more difficult.
So the maintenance cost would always be there. When I hear filters, I think changing, what's the typical cost of maintaining,
Maintaining it,
yeah,
so to compare and I'm working on getting the O&M numbers. I didn't have good ones from my manufacturers, and I owe that to you all to update that. The reverse osmosis is gonna have a higher O&M cost because it's more work, labor intensive and chemical intensive to clean them. Versus right now, in the existing plant, you just run water backwards through it, and that dislodges all the particles and cleans them, whereas RO is a little bit more involved.
Okay.
And there's higher power use because of the pumps.
All right.
That number, correcting the number on slide 17, it's 6,692,000. So that was the PC.
Did you have a question, Jeff?
Yeah, I have a quick question. How many membranes will the ROs hold, and what are the expected life of that membrane?
That's an excellent question, and one that I'm gonna rely on our manufacturers for. So, it depends on the, what they call it, flux rate and all that. So, but that is an answer that we owe to the council to put that together. Because that's all part of the life cycle cost process. Yep, yep. Any other questions on treatment? Otherwise, we can move to the pressure alternatives. We're getting there. We're almost through the alternatives. Thanks for your good questions.
Well, this is a serious topic,
Yeah,
issue,
Yeah.
however you want to state it, so we want to make sure that we try and get the best knowledge we can get, so we know
yeah.
the best way to move forward.
I don't believe we'll come back again. Is that correct, Representative?
That is correct.
Yeah.
How long do
So,
you think that'll take?
4 weeks?
where we go?
That was the goal, was
Yeah.
in a month. Now, as Caleb mentioned, we rely heavily on vendors, and when we say vendors, it's the technology experts that make the equipment. And we don't guarantee they're getting any project, we just have to work on relationships for them to help us with costs right now, so we can build those life cycle costs, we can get you that information, and they have to look at the water quality data and come up with, on their end, what it would take to handle the water we're dealing with. So if the vendors are responsive, a month and a half is realistic to be back with the costs. Caleb has been talking about life cycle costs, O&M costs for all of these alternatives. And then at that point, and again, this is a conversation that would be looking for kind of a direction of how the study you would like to kind of have tailored to what fits the city of Lakeview the best.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease, remember?
That is true.
I have a dumb question, I don't know, it might be dumb, but how do you know what process to start first? Like if you, isn't it essentially writing a blank check when you start drilling, or when you have more information, is it a little more involved?
You will, we aren't necessarily looking for gold, but the idea is that you will look at maps and take in, if we wanna say that we wanna, best guess scenario on where we would try and find a test drill, test a drill out. So, it's not just, do we wanna look, what are our options of still looking in the park, or, somewhere near where well 3 is, or do we want to take a couple of options and then see if we can find one, like that's 2 miles out of town or whatever, that we would then have to bring the water to town.
So we have to
But-
decide if we're gonna do the reverse osmosis though, or the other one, right, before you guys decide.
Well, we know we need a well, so I
Right,
guess,
right.
which type of well or which aquifer we wanna hit.
I'm sure we're looking at these guys
Right.
being the experts
Yep.
to bring us the options, and the thing about that is, again, it's for the future, and so that needs to be played in there more than you think. I think anyway, that's one of the most important parts. That I don't want to put a well in and then 2 years down the road, well, we've got to do this now,
Right.
So we want to be set up so we've got options.
Correct. And I think you kind of to answer your question, you'll pick a direction that you're trying to go. And that direction can be adjusted a little bit.
That's what I think.
To make sure we're going, as soon as you get the water quality back and all of that, we go back and refine the design.
That's what I think. So if we decide, they decide they wanna go one direction, if we find out, ooh, those aren't the numbers we thought, we can.
Correct, yep,
Okay,
yep, you don't,
that's all I was.
yep, great question.
Did you do the early water project?
What's that?
Did you do the early, City of Early, they did a reverse
We did not.
osmosis?
That was a different engineer.
Yeah.
Was it?
So I have a question about the RO, you guys call out a Weisner or Wiesner, whatever,
Yep.
however you wanna pronounce that. Why did you choose them and not like Wiggins or the new like Delsa Tech or whatever it's called? And I'm basing this off of, because
Right.
like here you talk about it's 80-20 recovery. Like Wiggins
Right.
are typically 85-15, that new Delsa Tech is saying 90-10.
Right. So he's saying how much water you, for every 100 gallons a minute you pump in, how much do you get out on the other side? So we'll look at a couple different options and we try and pick the more conservative option. So in this case, we picked the one that has the lower recovery rate because it gives us a better, I don't know, opens us up to more manufacturers to it. Though, do we need to stick with that one when we get into detailed design? Not necessarily, but it gives us a budget cost on it. Because the more water we can push through, the less we have to send to the sewer, and that's
Correct.
good for you. Yeah. Yeah.
So, with that being said, and I know I'm gonna get a little technical here, but when we're doing this, are we speccing something, when we get to that point, do you spec, we want this manufacturer, or is there a reason why you spec that?
I can jump in here.
Yep, there we
Yeah.
go.
So,
That's a funding question, honestly.
When we're in design mode,
Right.
we have to be designing around something, and we have to rely on the manufacturer. It's typically a manufacturer that we have a trust relationship with as far as providing us the information, documentation, because our design needs that. Now, when you are receiving funding to do a project, we cannot sole source and say that this technology is going to be sold by them. That is not allowed. We have to have equivalents or equals to be allowed to bid that project. So it is not, we need somebody to give us the information through the design process so we know the size, the footprint. You know, we have to have some basis that we're designing around. But then when it comes to bid, that is an open, fair market to all the
Okay, so my
technologies that are out
question
there that
is-
meet the requirements.
My question is, I'll use kitchen cabinets as an example. When you're building a house, you can put in kitchen cabinets and it's designed to have so many square feet of kitchen cabinets.
Yeah.
And it's, or equal to, and it needs to be this quality or equal to. Well, there's a lot of different variations of quality and longevity.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing no matter what type of equipment we're talking about. So I don't want us to say equal to somebody, but there's the low-cost people
Yep.
that are just the entry level that I'm gonna get you by that doesn't affect the pocketbook near as much. And then there's the people that affect it's the old Fram oil filter commercial, maybe I should say. You can pay me now or pay me later. You wanna put a crappy filter in, and I'm gonna rebuild your motor later, or I'm gonna use a good filter, and your motor's gonna last a lot longer.
Yeah.
I would like us to be able to utilize that flexibility in doing this.
So-
Does that make sense?
Yep, but again, the funding is going to require that you accept other, we cannot sole source, but,
But
Well, we can
your
do-
expertise can guide us
and we
down
can
the
write a
right.
specification
Yeah.
that is so tight around what we expect out of this, that it's gonna eliminate a lot of the ones over here, and hopefully put us in this level, because they can't meet it otherwise, like the expectation that, and that's a performance specification that's, we write
Yeah,
in.
It's like the cost per mile to drive a vehicle. Some
Yeah.
vehicles cost 10,000, but it costs 20 cents a mile to drive them, or some vehicles cost 15,000, but it costs me 3 cents a mile to drive them.
Right.
Well, a little bit more upfront cost, but saves on the long run and more reliability.
So you put a bidding process out there, did you take all bids, or do you contact some other?
So again, with the way funding works and the requirements of funding in Iowa is that it is an open public bidding process. We would help you advertise to contractors, and when I say contractors, the actual guys that are gonna show up and build it or manage the builders doing it, we call them general contractors. General contractors have the plans and specifications in their hands and they know what they're bidding now. Then they reach out to vendors and they solicit numbers from them and call them subs to the contractor. And then ultimately, yes, this is an open, it could be a contractor out of Wisconsin that comes in, has the low number, and then they have a really good resume and you check the references. You know, you might say we're a little gun shy because they're from Wisconsin, so we do our homework, we make sure. But that is part of that public bidding process.
Well, in the direction that you choose to go down, there's not that many people that are building RO systems. So, I mean, it's gonna get fairly tight on who will bid in. That's why, I mean, he's saying somebody from Wisconsin, because there's not that many that are out there building RO systems, and depending on what you specify, what we, you know, the direction we go, and then where the design kind of takes us on what, it's kind of like when you picked out what you were gonna do with the wastewater treatment plant. Are you gonna go with the, you know, the Lumna system or the other system, you know? It's kind of, then it gets more defined on who's able to actually bid on it and be able to do the work, so.
Sorry, I just said
No,
that.
these are all great questions, and once again, like, this is a report that we're preparing on your behalf and for the city, and so we appreciate this engagement. I'd rather have it come and all these questions than no questions.
I have another
So-
dumb question, then I'll shut up, maybe, but, so, I caught something you had said the well three, they had dug it, and then something wasn't done right. Was that the person that put it in, or was it just, like, are we gonna have that issue again? Or they didn't find the sand or whatever?
I'm
Is
not
that-
sure
Okay.
what exactly it was, but.
I just didn't wanna have that problem again.
That
Yeah.
well was drilled before both Caleb and I were born.
Oh,
And,
Yeah.
and to with that, the standards in the state have changed
Oh,
over time.
gotcha, okay.
And so, like, it is
There's more of
hard,
an
it's
inspection
hard to
process.
say exactly what the standards were at that time, what analysis they did, you know, to see what gravel pack they should use to not allow that sand. We've learned a lot in the last
Awesome.
50 years or
Thank
60
you.
years.
I was just curious, I caught that, I was like,
No, but great question, because we don't wanna repeat,
right,
that's the definition of insanity, right?
right. I just didn't wanna be in the same place 10 years from now, if we're working on it 40 years old. I just don't think- that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Somebody-
I'm doing one. Unless you want to.
Yeah,
Enough fun, huh?
tag team in a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, to change pace a little bit, we're going back to water pressure. So to give you a refresher, we have some lower than preferred pressures on the west side of town. You guys have adjusted the low water level in the water tower, and that's affected your effective storage that you can get out of that tower. So we developed some alternatives to improve upon that scenario. So first one is elevating the existing water storage tank. We talked about this a little bit in the kickoff meeting, but that would entail of removing the existing bowl, adding about 20 feet to the pedestal, and then adding that bowl back on. And that should add, what did you say, 15 PSI approximately?
Something like that, 20 to 30, depending on what we settle on.
And depending on the level of the tower too.
Yeah, so that should improve your pressure on the west side of town and maximize your effective storage of the existing tower. So another option is a full replacement of that tower. So the location is TBD at the moment. We've considered just north of the existing water treatment plant. We've considered right next to the existing tower, and the different elevations there can affect your cost estimate a bit. But right now we have about $2.3 million, and that full replacement will get you some more pressure, some more dynamic head there, static head, and should improve.
So it's approximately $900,000 more to put in a whole new water tower, bigger and taller compared to just raising our existing. Is that, am I reading that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
How much bigger?
Would it be bigger, or is it still a 300,000 gallon tank?
We could entertain different bids for a larger tower, larger tank or not. When we were looking at the size of things, typically our max day, projected max day was 550,000 gallons. So typically you want between 1.5 and 1.5 days of storage at a max day. So 300,000, it fits the bill. It's just over a half days of storage at that max day. So it's not needed to oversize it. In fact, oversizing it can create some water quality issues. So we were going with a replacement of the same size. It didn't seem that the size was an issue.
So,
Did we take into any consideration on the Evapco needs if they were to have emergency
We haven't
requirements
looked at
for?
that yet, no.
Okay, I mean, because right now, if something were to happen out at Evapco, they'd drain our water tower in with what?
Well, part of the reason why we get the alarms is, as they said earlier, we keep it so
Right.
full because of our pressure. We still have quite a few feet in there, and if we can get the well turned on and the high service pump pumping, we can probably maintain if they have a significant fire. Now, if the whole site out there goes up, I don't think we're gonna be able to do anything. They're gonna be drafting out of the lake.
Right. So, this water pressure alternative, and I'm going back to the water tower,
Yep.
raise the height of the existing tower by 20 feet, so you're just gonna take that existing bowl and raise it up, basically, and make the water tower taller, correct?
The water tower contractor's telling us that they could do that. They take it off, set it on the ground.
Right.
Yeah.
But I thought I heard in conversation at some point in time, we could add on to our bowl to make it taller. Did I
Just the
not hear that
column,
correctly?
just the column pipe to raise it up foot-wise, not,
Because I think I had in my
Capacity.
head we were gonna increase capacity and get a taller water tower out of the same thing, or is that maybe just putting a different bowl on top?
that'd be putting a different bowl on top.
Okay, okay.
So is our equipment strong enough to handle the increase?
They're telling us that it is. We would go into that detailed design of it, but they standardize those column bases, so yours is a fluted style. They make those, I mean, they pick one standard design for anything from, 100 feet to 200 feet, the thickness of the metal, from my understanding. So once again, we're relying on experts to tell us the feasibility of things.
We brought this up to Jason, and he discourages, as I know, a second water tower. Years ago, I'm from old school Lakeview, water tower sat up on top of the hill. It was a smaller water tower, but the elevation, was
Right.
more beneficial.
For that side of town.
So that's it.
For that side of town.
Did you read my note?
Nope.
Is that a note, Caleb? Is there a reason?
So we could flip over to the next one. Are we done with WP2? Any other comments on the tower?
Then you're gonna cover that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which one were you on?
No,
What-
we're going to slide 19 now.
Slide 19.
Yep.
Yep, all right.
Yeah, so next water pressure alternative is a booster pump station. So booster pump station splits your distribution system into two different pressure zones. So you have a low pressure zone and a high pressure zone. You have a pressure reducing valve in the middle to keep that equilibrium a little bit. And you can pump water from that low water zone to the high water zone. They're more.
So there's a couple ways of doing it. So this would be, you put a booster pump station north of the water treatment plant right along the road. And so that there's two ways of doing it. One is you can have the booster pump station just a standard fill draw where it's pumping into, and you build a new tower over where the old tower used to be. Or the other way of doing it is if you were to pair this with a new treatment plant, and you have a larger clear well, those pumps are always running to provide increased pressure. So there's two ways of doing it. How this is lined out right now is just a constant pressure system, so those pumps will always be running, drawing out of the clear well to feed water into the system.
Like Jason was saying, you add a second water tower, you got double the maintenance and
Recoding's expensive,
Well,
inspections.
it's $300,000 more to put in the pump than it is to raise the water tower.
And that's not including operations
Right.
and maintenance costs
So why,
for
that
maintaining
would,
the pumps.
to me, that wouldn't even be a feasible option.
But if we put just another tower up there and could run it off of the high service pumps, I don't know how tall you'd have to go up there, but you're probably still pushing, what, $1 million-ish range? If we're looking at 2-something to put a 2.5 to put a new one over here and go taller,
We could
probably looking at $1 million over there.
We could cost it out. The part that's gonna be the cost is you still have to do all your valves in the system to isolate it. And then you have to build a dedicated transmission main from the treatment plant up there. We can cost it out and look at it. I don't wanna,
And yeah, right now, a 100,000 gallon tank just did one a year ago is about 1.3, and that's a small tank, 100,000 gallon. When Caleb said, yeah, you have to break your system up, so obviously, if you put a tower or a booster pump and are gonna help the northwest side of town, you have to separate that from the other side of town, because otherwise, water takes the path of least resistance. It's just gonna over pressurize your currently, good pressured areas that are already at 60, they're gonna jump to 80. So you have to go in and strategically find all those lines that are in this loop of a system and start separating those so that now you have two separate zones, so you can control the pressure up here, but that pressure is not over pressurizing down here.
We wouldn't have to do that though if we raise the tower, because what's the difference?
Now, if you raise the existing tower, you are gonna increase the pressure in the areas now that we can call the better pressured areas. Say it's 50, it's gonna go to 65, and your 35 is gonna go to 50 or 47 by raising that tower. It's all still the same zone, because the tower is creating that pressure throughout the gradient. So if you flip back to that page earlier showing those contours, by adding more pressure at the tower, everywhere is gonna see that increase in pressure. The whole, because it's all one
But
zone.
not as-
So if you put, help me understand, so if we put another tower, a second tower up there, and tied it into the exact same system, relatively, wouldn't that do the same thing, but it'd increase the power, the pressure on the northwest side of town, but it's gonna equalize in the center?
You have to selectively, you have to break, you have to close certain valves and add what they call pressure reducing valve. You're effectively dividing the system in half or in thirds.
I think the way I'm understanding the question is like,
Oh.
in the scenario that no water's being used at
Okay.
all, so
Yep.
nothing is moving in mains, by adding that second tower, in theory, you would increase pressure there. But now, as soon as you have water usage in the community, that water is taking the path of least resistance downhill, so it's gonna keep coming this direction to the low side of town, and you're not gonna see those pressure impacts, because that water's trying to get away. It's
Okay.
not staying there and building pressure, does that
Yep, now
make
I'm
sense?
following,
Because you gotta think of water as moving constantly.
because if they turn the faucet, hypothetically turn the faucet on here, it could come out of the new tower compared to the old tower, and them two aren't gonna be joined together.
If you did a new tower, you'd separate them to where, yeah, you could tell what parts of town are getting water from which tower.
If you put two, but if you didn't separate the systems out, you're gonna have what you're talking about. It's not gonna equalize.
And see, and that's where I'm having the problem, why would it not equalize?
With
So it's like,
current tower, just elevating, is that?
No,
Just
we
having,
have one tower here, and one tower here,
and it's the same zone.
and it's the same zone, why isn't this gonna suck from both of them equally?
it would, so that's why you have to.
Because this one's gonna sear a little bit more here because the pressure's higher, but this one's gonna help increase that pressure because it's got more than the 35 PSI to this zone. Why do you have to put a valve
All
here?
your water is gonna come from your right, my left, let's say that's the higher tower, because that has higher pressure on it. So that spot in the middle is only gonna get water from one direction until it equalizes, until there's enough use and demand that then it allows the
Okay,
other
so
water
this
to come
one's
in.
farther away than this one, okay? So this one's got more to travel, so the pressure's gonna decrease
Not a
over
lot.
to it.
Your losses are pretty minimal. That higher one is still gonna be the one that's gonna get there first. Now, if a fire starts in between the two, your high one and your low spot in the middle, now the water is gonna come from your other tower, because this water's getting pulled out fast. So now it will feed back in, but in like, again, kind of back to the closed water scenario, nothing's being used, that higher one's gonna win. It's gonna get there first.
Just wanna make sure I'm following it correctly.
I'm not tracking.
The tower's down.
Moving forward.
Okay, we're on the same page?
Yep, I just questioned, sorry.
Yeah, good questions. Okay, so back to slide 19, alternative WP-4, we have a water main installation. So on that northwest side of town, there's lots of high-use commercial industrial users that are being fed by smaller diameter branched water mains. Could be a partial cause of some of those pressure issues and whatnot on that northwest side of town. So if we add a larger diameter main to connect or loop some of those branch mains, there will be improved supply and pressure to those areas, helping circulate your entire water system. There's a figure in the report if you'd like to see exactly where that water main's at, but we have it on the north side of Highway 175. So, and opinion cost for that is about $700,000. Questions there? Okay. Supplementary improvements. So, in the grand scheme of things, these are typically lower in cost, can sometimes be brought in with your annual budget, but some improvements we'd like to propose nonetheless. These are basically all, most of them to improve upon your water loss.
So you're saying a new water salesman with a flow meter, is that so we can track the gallons?
Yes.
We already have a meter on there.
I don't believe we do.
I'm 100% positive there's a meter on, I looked at it.
Really?
I can't answer that. I'll be honest, today was the first time I've ever touched the water salesman.
It's certainly not red.
It's certainly not red, but we have a meter on it.
I was gonna say, it's never been read as long as I've been here, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, it's just, it's never been read.
So why are we not reading that to kind of help with that?
Like I said,
And well, seriously, why are we not cross-referencing the money we take in for the water that's going out?
well, we know what it is, it's just,
No, you don't.
yeah, we do, we know what the loss is. We know that we're billing this much, we know that we're pumping this much. It's
Right,
just to
but-
find
but-
the areas to where it's lost.
Right,
is-
so why are we not double checking our meter at the salesman with the dollars that we're taking in to make sure it's cross-referencing?
Oh, you mean the quarters from the salesman?
Correct. Because every quarter goes so many gallons. Or
Right.
every 4 quarters or 6, whatever they gotta put in.
Yeah, it's just, as long as I've been here, nobody's ever read that meter.
I didn't know that there was a meter, I was
There
told
is-
that there wasn't a meter on
There
it,
is
so.
a meter there, we
Well,
looked
then
at
we
it,
need to start reading it.
we looked at it at one of the fire
Then we
meetings.
need to find out what the numbers are on it and get it into the system to read.
When you can also go back, if you know exactly what sales purchases came from the salesman, because then depending on what price per gallon, as long as you have that monthly, yearly, whatever it is, you'd be able to see how many
Right,
gallons
you'd be
came
able
out
to-
of that,
you'd be
too,
able to
just by
track
the dollar amount.
Right,
Yeah, yeah.
I think now we're just probably throwing it into a general fund and not putting it back in, or I don't know where it's going.
It's going into the water
Goes
fund.
into the water
Yeah.
fund.
I imagine it's documented though, that you
Yeah,
could
yeah.
backward map it.
Yeah, cause you take the quarters to the bank and they give you a deposit slip and you put it back into the, water sales and.
So you can see that for what usage.
Yeah.
Your next one, you got water meter replacements. How long ago has it been that we started replacing?
2013,
2013, and
We
they're
replaced them.
obsolete already?
no, they're not obsolete, they're,
The batteries in them are starting to go dead on the earths, and
And
the
you-
other thing that we're dealing with is the plugging issue because of the calcium.
and you can't replace the batteries because they're sealed because of the because they're,
Well, at
They're
this
glued
cost, we
in
can
because
send-
of the
we can
water.
Send our guys back out and read them at the house. I mean, $1.3 million, it's,
If they're only gonna last 11 years.
yeah.
But is
Long
there,
if we update our
is there a better, better water meter where the batteries aren't sealed or can be replaced or upgraded?
Part of the issue that we have to deal with is the program that we use reads our electrical also. So it's finding a program that will read both.
that was why we had to go with the water meters we did initially,
They were replaced in 13?
2013, 10-year batteries. And we were told at that time we could replace the batteries, but
Yeah.
you can't.
That's what we were told.
We were told you could replace the batteries, and you can't.
Yep.
Who sold us that stuff?
Dan Sinclair with Badger,
Make sure we don't use him again.
no comment.
So,
Go ahead.
Okay, so going on, just hold on.
So do you, back to this loss stuff, before we get away from it, you go way back to the beginning here. We have significant loss, and it seems like it's increasing every year, the last 3 years, the way it looks, right? Did I read that right? 35 to 39 to 44.
Yeah, correct.
So, is there somewhere we should target first that's looking at that? I mean, that's significant loss.
I think one of the things that we can do, even as a part of this study,
I thought we had somebody that went and checked all our,
Well, we had a guy come in and check all the valves and make sure they're turning, they're painted a different color, but I don't know if we've done anything with it since then, because basically we're spinning our wheels. Oh, that valve works, that valve don't work, okay, so now we know that.
yeah, we had some water, we had some lines that we did.
Well, if we made sure that we read that meter on the water salesman, et cetera, and the splash pad, we put a meter on that just to see where it's going.
Right, but 22, 23, and 24, splash pad was here, so that's irrelevant.
Sure.
Okay? We are losing a considerable amount of water, and it's going up drastically, so do we look for a leak somewhere, or, I mean, what, is there a way, that's what I'm trying to figure out,
So-
how can we eliminate this loss?
Our water loss was that high before we started putting in those new meters. When we put in all those new meters, it dropped back down into the 25 range. Now 10 years later, it's getting back up to, and I'm attributing a lot of to the meters aren't reading correctly or have stopped reading, and we need to get them replaced.
Okay, so
And we replace
this
them
is
as
a
often as we
subject for a
can.
different time, because if it's the meters aren't reading correctly,
Well, they slow down as they get,
they start reading slower.
they start reading
Yeah.
slower or they stop. Meters do not speed up.
Okay.
Especially with all the deposits.
Yep, yep, they get hindered and,
Do we read the campground?
yep.
And this is why it would have been probably September of the first year here, of me being here and Teresa being here, we bought 60 water meters and we replaced 60 water meters that had stopped reading. I just got a list of another 20. So as we get the list, we're going to change them to try to fix this.
But are we still using the same ones from Badger?
No.
Okay.
No.
For one, he put us on we were on like a 4-month time delay before we could get them. So we switched to, I call it Delphi, but it's not Delphi. Deal, which is coming from Jeff Van Meter, which has a larger opening on it than what the Badgers do. So I don't want to say bigger particles of calcium's going to go through, but
Essentially, right, yeah.
essentially. So that's why we switched to the ones that we did to try to help eliminate some of the issues that we're having.
Okay. Because that's a significant amount of, then if we were at 25 and then we're back to 45, we'd have to do the math, but it wouldn't take very long to pay for them. Right? Can we make a list to check the math on that, at 20% water loss to see? Because it's a roughly $1.3 million investment, whatever. But if we're losing $500,000 a year, we're not only losing it on the water, we're losing it on the sewer as well.
Well, right, yeah.
I mean, we gotta look at it that way. I think that'd be a topic for,
Yeah.
Okay. Last alternative we have is fire hydrants and valve replacements. You guys did an evaluation of your fire hydrants, we got that inventory from you.
Yep.
And you've voiced that there's several gate valves as well.
25.
25, that's good to know, thank you.
They're broke.
Broke or not working the way they are supposed to.
Won't close all the way or.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and 25 valves, need to be replaced, and that is good to know. We can develop a cost estimate for that one. But obviously, we have equipment not working that needs to be replaced, so that is our final alternative. I guess any questions before we move on to funding?
Okay, I will take my best shot at the funding alternative. We have Erin Pengel, who's had a conversation with Therese a little bit about funding, so she's our in-house funding expert, so the information I'm presenting is the things that she's pulled together. She's in the day-to-day side of things, so I'm gonna do my best to convey this to you. So, as we look at funding options for the city, there's a couple different ways of doing it. On the left are kind of your revenue and GO bonds. We're not as familiar with those. I want to focus on the three on the right here. SRF funding, USDA, and then the CDBG grant program that's in there. So each of these uses a different measure of household income from different years to evaluate eligibility and interest rates for it. So under the state's drinking water state revolving fund, that first one there, they use the median household income. And so Lakeview's median household income that they're looking at was $55,938 plus or minus $13,000. And so that makes the city eligible for effectively a 2% loan over a 20-year term. The SRF does also have a 30-year term. I've just got the 20 years shown here. USDA looks at a different year of MHI, which is helpful, so that's why that number is different. So MHI listed there is 60,000 plus or minus 8,800. USDA has 3 tiers of rate categories. That MHI, median household income, places you in the intermediate rate, 3 1/4. I will note both of these interest rates are updated quarterly. So they just were updated as of January 1st. They'll update again later this year. And then the USDA loans are a 40-year term. And USDA also comes with a potential for grant assistance. So basically what the USDA does is they look at comparable rates in the area, communities of the size, and once the rates hit a certain threshold, then they start kicking grants to keep rates competitive among area communities. So potentially up to 45% grant assistance is available through USDA. And then the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, that's a grant that underlies both of those programs. Unfortunately, you have to have an LMI of more than 50%, 1% stands for low to moderate income. CDB, Lakeview has an LMI of 35%, so not eligible and probably not able to challenge that number either. So those are the funding options.
Is there a cap on the money that you can borrow?
So the way that it would go is we'll finish up the report. After council's approval, then you submit it to the state for review. Once the state concurs, then you can submit applications for funding, and they would come back with what they would call a funding package. Depending on the federal dollars that are flowing this way and that way, sometimes funding more is available from USDA than SRF. I don't see that bank account for that.
And you can submit to both.
You can submit to both, absolutely, yep, yep.
So how long does this process take?
That will be slide 23, we'll get there. Or, sorry, 24.
Something to note on the FABA requirements.
Oh, yeah, so one of the things that is, and this is just a part of the funding game, is each funding agency has their requirements. So one of the things that both the State Revolving Fund and USDA have is what they call Buy America, Build America. So in the last rounds of legislation that was passed by the federal government, attached to the funding are some strings, and these strings are that and it's a good thing, but it has some effects, as everything that's made or used on a project has to be made in the US, a certain percentage of it. So it's a new version of American Iron and Steel, if you've heard that term before. So essentially, it increases the cost of the project, but it's built into both of them, so it's unavoidable. So if somebody were to write a check for $7 million, then they could go ahead and buy the project. The USDA project would cost about 15% more than just like a home contractor to do it, if that makes sense. So we'll keep you in compliance with that. It's just something to note that sometimes there's a little bit of an elevated cost when it's associated with some of these federal dollars. Is that what you were?
Yeah, and they both have kind of their pros and cons. They both come with certain red tape, and they're not the same red tape, which is even that much more fun to try to navigate. On SRF specifically, there is a phase where they have to come through and review the areas for impacts. That takes some time. And then on the USDA side, you're talking Davis Bacon wages, which obviously add to a project for cost too, so. But again, when the time comes to look at those, we would have our funding assistant help us get those packages. And ultimately, she'd probably be here to better navigate those conversations, but explain those pros and cons to both, and let the council make the decision on which funding avenue they feel is in the best interest of the city.
And you'll assist us in applying for the
Yes,
whichever funding
yep, that was
avenues.
part of our
Yeah.
agreement for the study, was that at no additional charge, we will assist the city on applications for those funding processes.
And so then on page 22 and 23, we have a potential impact to the water rates. So what we do here is for each alternative, we take the opinion of cost, the estimated debt service at those percentages, the estimated O&M numbers, which those are still in flux, to create a total added yearly expense, and then we take the number of users and then divide it out by user to get an approximate increase to user cost. So we've developed those both for SRF funding and for USDA funding, and those will, as we kind of refine the alternatives, those may change. I want to focus on slide 23, USDA funding. I think this might be SRF funding. I don't know, we need to look at the tables, but.
It almost, because I was kind of wondering that too, because it almost looks like maybe they're flip-flopped.
I think they're flip-flopped.
Because the SRF funding,
Is,
yeah,
the SRF should be higher, so
I'm thinking they're.
I'm thinking they're flip-flopped as well, but we will revise those and get those corrected in the final report. So, and we don't have all of the alternatives listed because we don't have all the O&M numbers as well. So you can see a treatment plant alternative of around $6.7 million has a monthly increase to users of $18. So that's just kind of a representative number there of what that project would cost on a monthly basis to each user. So, and USDA, like I said, has grant funding available. SRF is a straight up, where there's no grant or loan forgiveness available on the back end of that. So, schedule. We can talk schedule a little bit. Noah, you want to take this one? Wrap us up?
I don't think you should schedule So, as I mentioned earlier, from tonight's meeting in working with vendors, we are shooting for that 1 month from today to come back with we'll call it a 95% report, but at that time, we'd be looking for your agreeance, concurrence with the report, the recommendations, any changes that you'd like to see before we submit it. And then we would go through the process of submitting to the Iowa DNR. It goes to the Iowa DNR's engineering department for review. And again, as I mentioned when I opened, the study is kind of that tool and mechanism that helps the DNR understand where you're going with future projects, as well as getting the funding to be on board to do those projects. We would anticipate that IDNR review. That was very generous of Caleb to say 3 months. These are compounding, so 1 month, and then we go to 4 months, so 3 months in between. I would not hold my breath on that 3 month review. However, I don't wanna say your hands are tied during that time, but it's just a waiting period, and that review needs to be complete before we can go into the next steps, which is then starting to move towards engaging and going towards which projects make sense to start picking off in likely phases. So then at that time, you'd be looking to retain engineering services, and then after that is secured, you'd look at your funding. And something I'd like to point out on the funding is that, and Teresa's very aware of this, that there is planning and design loans with SRF to where you can get the engineering services in, I believe it's a 3-year loan to be assisted with payment on that. So, but again, our funding expert would help navigate through that process, help the process on the applications for funding. If everything goes well in funding in a few months, you've received your packages, you would look at those packages and determine which one makes sense for the city. And then ultimately, once the funding is prepared, and it doesn't have to be prepared for construction, if you decide to do the planning and design loan, once that funding is secured, that's when your engineer would engage and start the process of whatever projects we're deciding and determined to kind of take precedence and start with number one and kind of work through the process. That engineering process, preliminary design, you'd be looking at I would say 3 to 5 months, depending again on which projects would be selected to move forward with. And then after preliminary design, you move into final design, which I would say, again, really depends on the projects. Well projects don't take near as long as the design. An RO water treatment project obviously takes a pretty significant amount of design effort. So those would be refined as we know which direction or path that you'd be looking to go down. And then you get into, obviously when the design is complete, there is a process to review a public hearing for the plan specifications form of contract. And then it would be a LET project, an open public bid project. And then after those bids are received, those are reviewed with the owner. At that time, you would have the options to accept the low responsible bidder, or you could reject all bids if they did not come in favorable. And then you get into your construction period and project closeout. Something to mention here is, talking through this sounds really easy and really streamlined, but there's obviously, going through everything that we discussed tonight, there's likely some phasing. You know, there's going to be some thought process on which project up front makes sense. The wells are probably a pretty high priority knowing the scenario you're in. Water treatment after the wells, probably pretty important to get this water treatment figured out. The pressures, you know, important, but maybe, and that's part of what we need to understand eventually is kind of which priorities would be set first. And then something else to keep in mind too with the funding is a lot of times we will ask for as much as possible and see what those packages can produce and try to go for, you know, everything, but then depending on when the packages come back, what is in the package, whether or not it's favorable, you can decide which of those projects make sense to go forward with. If you were to go down the path of potentially using the project or USDA funding that has grant dollars that potentially could come with it, a lot of times what they make you do is not a lot of times, what they will make you do is spend the dollars allocated to the city first. Once those dollars, whatever threshold that is in the package, are spent, then the grant dollars come in. And the important part to know there is that's why we build the reports the way we do with additional projects and alternatives, because if you were to go down the path of wanting to use the USDA funding with grant, those grant dollars don't come in until the end or towards you, until you hit that point. So then you want to make sure, obviously, you maximize those dollars and use them the best you can. So that's where the projects that were listed in the report, you can say that was one of those projects that we'd like to do, and the grant dollars are still there, and you can proceed with that with the grant dollars.
Does that project with the USDA take a little longer to go through the hassle, or?
They both come with their red tape and hoops I mentioned earlier. You know, SRF is an environmental review that can take a significant amount of time, and then the USDA, yeah, they both can take some time.
So, we know we need a new well. No ifs, ands, buts about it. We need a new well.
Yep.
I don't think we have 30 months to wait to decide if we're gonna do a new well.
And that's back to this phasing that we can get going on, of like which project comes first. And so if we know that information, I will need to check with Aaron, the funding specialist that Caleb mentioned, as far as, I believe there's a way you can even start on a project, and then once it's approved, it can be reimbursed with whichever funding package. I think on SRF, on USDA, I don't think you can go that direction. On SRF, they will allow that. So back to when the packages and the funding are available to be discussed, that's an important thing. And to your comment, you know, that's exactly like the design team, the first effort, I'm with you 100%, would be that well. And that starts with the test well program, unfortunately. We gotta go make sure it's a space that the city occupies or can get 200 feet of ownership around. It has to meet all those clearances, and then we gotta get a test well driller up here to actually do the test, find the quantity, make sure it's the quality that we can handle, and then get into design of a production well.
So you mentioned, or somebody mentioned way earlier, it might have been Caleb, to go down to the Dakota water source, or, yeah, the aquifer. Maybe somebody's got one down there, and we can get test water samples and stuff from it, or how do we find somebody, or, because nobody in town has a well to speak of.
So we use a website that is public information, it's called GeoSam in Iowa, and that will show wells, so we can look at, that's a place we can start. You know, City of Carroll is in the Dakota, I know they're 23 miles as the crow flies south east of here, but they are in the Dakota, and we work with the City of Carroll, very familiar with their aquifer and the water quality that they have. Not saying that's, again, aquifers are kind of a unique thing, just because we know what water quality they deal with, it could be different when we plug one up here. But we would look in the area for other wells that have been punched that deep and see what they have for water quality reports on those.
Do you work with the Brito one?
I did not work with the Brito one.
How about any local farmers, I mean, in the surrounding area? Is there anything
So-
anywhere near that deep? you
So
know
most
of?
of the time, your irrigation, you know, just south of town, you know, the Schulte's well, they're pulling out of that pond, alluvials, like your irrigation wells are too, because they don't care about the quality of water. They want it to irrigate crops. And then farm homes, you know, usually have a system, whether that's a Colgan package system, that's, you know, a little package system, that's treating water for the house. So they're typically not deep wells, they're going as shallow as possible. I'd be very surprised if a farmer in the area is in the Dakota. Just the expense of drilling the well 300 feet.
You know, ours is like over 300 feet.
Yeah.
But I don't think you're gonna go to the North Lake Alpha to find water.
You're all at your place?
At our place. Our place has got 300 feet, but the neighbor down, his is like shallow, his is like 20 feet deep. Yeah.
But that report, that
my
place you
geothermal
said you could go
were
and
at
check,
200
right?
feet.
What was that?
You said you could go and check it?
We can look on that website and sniff around the area of the wells that are registered. They're the registered wells.
There is a figure in the report, I'm not sure what page it is, that has, I just grabbed a snip from GeoSam that shows some of the wells. And I think probably what we would do is we'd call it, you called it earlier, Noah, a test well program, where we're working closely with the well driller, we're reviewing his information, identifying some of those sites. It seems like there's some more limestone on the east side of the city, but as you move towards the west, it disappears. Like, on the far end of the lake, it's probably 20 feet deep, but by the time you hit town, it's gone. So it's just, the formation disappears a little bit, so we'd work to see, that's why I put that 2 miles of transmission main in there.
And you mentioned his geothermal well, it's 200 feet?
My geothermals are 200 feet
Yeah,
Deep?
deep.
yeah. So we have access to all of
200
those and
feet
can,
deep.
would do that as part of the testable program of evaluating what are gonna be the best sites, where are some places we could pull a sample from.
So would any of them local well people have some of that information maybe?
They might, we could reach out to Sargent or Cahoy and see.
Yeah.
What's the one in Patty Grove?
Yep.
The ones we typically come across are Sergeant.
It
Cahoy,
begins with a
Lane.
B.
Is it Bresnahan or something?
Bresnahan.
Yeah, that's the name of the guy.
He's a geothermal guy.
And he digs wells as well, I mean.
Yeah.
But there's also a difference between a farm well and a municipality well.
I get that, but I'm trying to figure out the water samples,
Just for
get
the
the water
formation.
quality is what I'm going after to start with.
Geothermal wells typically wouldn't take water quality because they don't, you're not drinking it, it's not a concern of what's in that water, they just need access to the water.
So, you dig a geothermal well to get to that for way less than a $40,000 figure, what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the DNR, they're easy for us to pin, like every excuse on. The DNR requires a test well to be performed to their standard. So there is a standard, it has to be done by a licensed well driller, has to be done to like basically a production well standard. And then after that test well is drilled, they have to abandon that test well to a standard as well. And those are DNR driven standards. It's
Okay,
not-
so if we wanted, as a private entity, the city, not go through the program with the DNR or whatever to start with, couldn't we hire them to drill a couple sample wells to see what the water quality is? And abandon them?
You're saying without being just like directly sourced to the
Yeah,
contractor.
we
Go to
take it out of
Sergeant
our-
and say, hey, can you come drill these?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question.
You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
As long as they drill the, so we're,
I
You would
wouldn't
still
wanna
have to
let the DNR know that we're trying to do
you would
that.
still have to let, that's where, you would have to let the DNR
They
know,
touch me. They touch me.
in theory, because if that is a good well, and we say, hey, that's the one we're
We'd have to yeah, I think,
as production, we have to share that information with the DNR, we have to show them the lithology, the water quality information, and they're gonna say, wait a second, you didn't get the permit to drill the test. I don't know what would happen,
I think
I prefer not to find out.
Well, but you see what I'm getting at, why do we spend 40 if we can spend 5?
the cheapest way to do it is, as the first step in the test well program, to look for wells that are in the Dakota and take water quality samples from them. That's the easiest, and to review those existing records.
And did you say there's a
That's
list
the
of
most
some of them in here?
economical
It's
way.
just a screenshot of it, it shows the depth of the wells.
Okay, it doesn't say who has them or,
You can find all that information on the website, and we would do that to look for those specific locations. That's your lowest cost option, is to look for a well that's in the aquifer that you want, to test it, to find the information about it, and then move forward from there.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
so what's,
That'd be page 80, bottom of page 80, figure 5.1.
what, on page 36, are these the different aquifers?
Yep, that's that's like a textbook kind of explanation of which ones are where, yeah.
So I never heard Fremont mentioned tonight.
Man, testing my knowledge on these.
Page 36.
Page 36, so they go by different names. So Fremont is a buried channel aquifer, so that's still considered an alluvial aquifer. And so I believe, from my review of the GeoSam database, that there is a little bit of one to the west of here, but that water quality is variable and the supply is variable. It's not as reliable as what you'd find in the Dakota.
Because it looks to me like that, on this map, it goes right through Lakeview.
And I think it does, and that's why we see the limestone. It's thicker on the west and it disappears, and then you see some wells just to the west and northwest of town that are 250 feet of muck before they hit a little bit of sand and gravel. So there's definitely some variability. And these would all be things that we would sort out in the test well program, because ultimately we want to find water, we want to find both good quality and quantity. And it's a process. I mean, I think Jason's working. Are you going to be a water witcher for us? Carry the stick around and look for the water?
No.
George Schmidt could do that.
Some people swear by it.
Any other questions?
Well, I guess I'm still a little, the timeframe, I don't know how we can speed things up, but hopefully the next visit, you have some answers for us, because I would like to, my personal experience and opinion is, the well is a very high priority. I mean, to me, it's our #1 priority as a city council, because if we don't have water, we don't have a town. I don't care how cute that sign looks south of town or east of town, we don't have water, it don't matter.
Without redundancy, that's terrifying.
Correct, and we have no backup.
So there is an option. I will speak with the funding specialist. We'll talk to Aaron about potential to start it, before, and what repayment could look like depending on which package is chosen. Now, understandably too, there is an option for city pay. Or
Right.
bonding.
That's my next question.
To where we could move right into like, hey, we know we need a well. Why don't you guys start talking to the DNR, figuring out sites where we can do this, look at those maps, figure out sites that make sense, and let's get some test wells poked this spring. That is an option. But then, and that's potentially where maybe we could try to navigate a gray area too, of if we go through the test well program, we start poking those holes in April, May, and looking for this water, while the DNR is reviewing the study, which needs to be done before we can go get funding packages. And then there's the potential that they start to line up. If we find the water, the quality, and the test well program might take us a month or 2 or 3. if we're not being, having success in these locations. But that could at least be concurring or happening while this other side is moving. And that is a lower cost for doing test wells compared to the design and the building of the production well. So then maybe you're ahead of the game a little bit, like we've established, hey, we know we got the water quantity and quality at these two locations. As soon as the funding comes through, we're ready to go. Priority number one, get designing on those wells and then get those wells built.
I mean, don't you,
Well, the thing about that is that, is there a way you can approach them that we're under, because we're down to one well?
DNR already knows that, don't they?
They do.
Absolutely.
So, maybe they're,
Their
Good
field
look
staff
out
and their
for them.
engineering staff, I don't think it's
Yeah.
rocket science.
yeah,
Well, I think it's a matter of us getting to the next step and then going to see what, how can we go with the well? Do we wanna, how fast can we push the SRF? You sometimes can get, you could even do a couple of different funding sources. You could, to get your well going, because sometimes, you can get preliminary request and then go with, planning and design, because you still have to plan and design the well.
Right.
Then you can possibly move in, you might be able to do it in phases and get SRF funding a little bit, I don't wanna say faster, if it's for 1 million versus knowing that we've got a $6 million project potentially coming down the pike. Cause you're still gonna have to take care of, one way or the other, you're gonna have to take care of the water plant. Either you're gonna have to make a decision to upgrade or do something there. Even if you dig the well, you've got that available, and get that to the current water plant, you might be able to work that, I think that we need to get to maybe the next step. Of what our options might be to get
irregardless,
to
we
that
know
well.
we need
Yeah,
a new
we know
well.
we need a well.
No matter where it's funded from, we have to do it, and I don't think we have 24 months to wait.
Okay, so
That's my opinion.
what I'm hearing is get with Aaron and we're gonna talk this planning and design loan, because ultimately, we could start the test well program and then start designing, once we have the information from the test well program,
Right.
like now, we can go on that. And
I
then,
don't wanna speak out of turn, but what do you guys think?
I
I'm
agree
with
with you,
you.
that's our main priority.
We've been saying that since, well, we're just
It's,
sitting on a powder keg.
yeah.
it's,
This should have been started last year when we capped that other well.
And then also the backup power
right,
is, I think, big.
and generators are about a year out right now.
So we need to,
Just, it is, I don't know.
it is what it is, but we, I don't wanna sit here and let all the red tape we go through and delay us
Sure.
12 to 14 months when we know collectively, this has to be done. We don't have a choice. It's like you own a house. I'd like to have a deck, but I know I need a new furnace. What am I gonna do? I have to put that deck in. or the furnace in. I gotta figure out how I'm gonna pay for it, but I gotta put that furnace in.
The deck's a want, furnace is a need.
Yeah, and this is a need for our city. I mean, we might have to give up some other stuff, but we've got to do this well.
Okay, so, if, for the sake of time too, in the next meeting, when we come back to review at 95%, we're basically finalized, and we're just gonna review, have this conversation again, and ask for your stamp of approval to send it to the DNR. Do you feel in 30 days, 45 days, if vendors cooperate, when we come back, do you feel bringing the funding specialist to have these same conversations and talk, or maybe her and I come down, maybe Teresa and anybody else that would like to join, and just have a meeting of how can we start the process? And to your comment, maybe we have to pay some out of our own pocket, that's not gonna be reimbursed, but how do we get this all moving so that on the well side at least, that we can get in a spot to where we feel, we're gonna be starting construction on the well in the fall of 25.
I feel very strongly about it.
Okay.
And I don't even know if it has to be at a regular council meeting, if we can have a special council meeting just for this subject.
Okay. Yeah.
That's my opinion. I'm open to anything on that avenue of stuff, but I'm thinking it's that important to our community.
Moving forward with a little rush.
Let us know when you can do that.
The funding, just conversation, yeah.
Yes.
How- I would say with confidence, we can probably pull that together next week. She comes out of our Okoboji area, I would come up and, again, whoever is available, and we can just talk some
Well,
strategies.
one's gonna be in Hawaii, one's gonna be in the
No,
Caribbean.
I'm not
and then the
leaving
other
for 3
Caribbean.
weeks.
Yeah.
You got one going to the Caribbean next week, you're going to the Caribbean next week.
I'm going to Florida, but I call it.
But yeah, but it's a very important infrastructure for our community. I mean,
Sure.
Budget means it means something, don't get me wrong, all the other stuff in the budget means nothing compared to our infrastructure.
And at least get the ball rolling
Yes.
for the process.
That's my opinion, I'm one of five.
Okay, no, understood. And obviously, any, decisions that we would make in that meeting would have to come back in front of the public council meeting
Yeah.
anyway, but I think that's a good work session meeting to have of just, let's talk, how can we get there as quickly as possible, specifically to the well, and then everything else is kinda, I breathe a lot easier at night knowing that that's moving.
Right.
Everything else can come after that time, in phases, when the funding packages are available, et cetera.
Cause there's
That's
nothing
reasonable
we can
to
do, right, to slow it down, I mean, the well goes, it goes, like, is there, like, our water usage isn't affecting it already, it's just, it goes, it goes.
No, it's just if something were to happen to that well and it would become unfortunately unusable right away,
Right.
we're in trouble.
Yeah, no, that's what
Yeah.
I mean, though, I mean, what
Yep.
we do really doesn't affect it, it's just. we're
No,
borrowing
no,
time.
on a daily basis, usage, no.
Gotcha, we're just on borrowed time.
Yep.
We can go back to well number 3, can't we?
I can turn it back on if I have to.
If you have to.
Yeah,
I mean,
maintenance
yeah.
headaches and gonna be hard on
It'd be,
some
yeah.
equipment. Yeah, yeah, that's the worst case scenario.
Worst
but
case
You do
scenario.
have,
Yeah, we do have that.
That's what I was getting at, too.
Yeah.
Let Teresa know what date you can do that and we'll move on.
okay, very well. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for your
Thank
time.
you.
Thanks for
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much, everyone. And if you think about it, I'd be curious on some of them local, if we need to contact with a local department that might have one of, sample of.
Sure, so we'll take a look at that, and if anybody's in that aquifer, Dakota, if we sent the names along, because you probably have a better connection than we would with them, and see if they'd be willing to allow us, to come pull a sample. We can work on that.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Stay warm.
Try.
Start my car while you're out.
Jason, do you have a utilities report? Abbreviated?
We fixed some equipment, we dropped the tree trunks, we got our man lift back, we ran some electrical, had a meeting with the DNR over a complaint, moved a little bit of snow. Tried working on the budget, making sure nobody's getting frostbite with the weather, and, working with contractors on the sirens and stumps and, that's about it.
Thank you. Teresa?
So I did get an email at the bottom of your memo. There was an email from Terry Cole, Calhoun and Burns about the bridge replacement project. In there it says they anticipate, the cultural resource portion review to take about a month. They're also waiting on the DNR floodplain permit, which they thought was a month or two. I got an email right before I came down here. Basically, the DNR has approved, the DNR has approved the floodplain permit, so that's been approved. They asked if we had any local floodplain permitting requirements, and I'll double check, but I don't believe that we do, that we have to have them fill out some type of permit form, so I think we're, making progress with that. Been working on the budget, union stuff, yeah, just different things, trying to, possibly have and we'll get to that here quickly, but a grant application for a building grant downtown, so, we've been working on some things with that.
Thank you.
Again, if we can get these packets out sooner instead of
Right.
6:30, 7 o'clock on a Friday night, so we got more time to look at it.
Yeah. Out-
Thursday would be preferable.
Yeah, the bad part is some of the information doesn't come in to me until Friday, so then it's difficult to get it out to you, but I'll do my best to try and get it out on Thursday.
Then are we having a meeting on Wednesday night with the
No,
fire department and trustees?
no,
Okay. I heard that scuttlebutt that we was.
Right, that's not been officially, that wasn't officially scheduled.
So,
Okay.
so why did we rush for why did the fire department rush for our budget meeting?
Because I was trying to get the information to try and get the letter out, and I did not get the letter out, so
I just asked you.
I'll say it's on me. And it really was, you know.
That's fine, I was under the impression we were having a meeting also, but I never got notification.
Well, in conversation with Jimmy, when we only had 2 trustees last year for the meeting,
Yeah, in the years past, we've had
Right.
sometimes 8 or 10 there, and this is before your time where we were having questions come back from the trustees to, this is before I was on the city, fire department, they're trying to figure out. And it's been a lot better since we've changed our policy of the fire department budget wasn't being used.
right?
It used to go back to the general fund, now it
Oh,
stays in
yeah,
the
no.
fire department fund.
Right.
And the trustees are a lot happier with that, but sometimes they're gonna have more questions. And with the new
Right.
piece of equipment this year again, they like to know that stuff.
Right,
I don't
and
know if
that-
there'll be 1, 5, 10 there, I
Right.
don't know. But
So,
as long as we have ample notice when we're having that, I'm fine with it.
right.
Thank you. George?
Yeah, I'll make it quick. We had 143 calls for service in January so far. Been working on some city ordinance stuff, trying to get that ready to propose to you guys. And then just working on some budget things. For the council packets, that's on me. Usually we get them, 4:30. Just Friday, we were kind of busy. And I wanted to bring Chalmers around, so everybody got to meet them. And I know we got stuck at some people's houses for a little bit because they were talking to Chavez, so that's on me, that one, so.
We've been talking about the packets, we've been asking for them back to when Scott was here on a Thursday, because when we get them late on Friday, there's no time to review them. And
Absolutely.
if you have to check into stuff, so that's why we're going with that. I mean, that's been back since I've been on the council.
Gotcha.
So,
I just wanted to say,
yeah.
other than that, that's it.
Thanks, George.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna consider changing the personnel policy, residency requirement.
Yeah, I mean, after some of our discussions with the union and looking at our personnel policy, I think that it would be advisable to change it to reflect what we're actually doing instead of what we, I guess, would hope to have done. So, I can find where it is here. So currently, employees technically, with the personnel policy, are supposed to live within 10 air miles of, the city. I think we maybe have four employees that currently reside within those 10 air miles. So, I'm making the suggestion that the personnel policy reflects 30 air miles of city limits of Lakeview. Part-time and seasonal temporary employees shall have no residency requirement.
We need a motion to do that.
I think we should change it to negotiable. Don't put air miles on it or whatever, just say negotiable. That way it leaves it open there, it's a case-by-case situation. I know, I'd like to see them live, but it's tough, it really is.
It's because we've been too loose on it, in my opinion, and it has created issues in our city.
The code, which I kind of indicated here, the code of Iowa, and I can't tell you when it was changed, but actually the requirements in the code of Iowa state that we can require them to live within the state of Iowa. We cannot have, we can expect a response time, within the city limits, and I believe, is that correct, George? But
It has
there's,
to be reasonable.
it has to be reasonable, but the code technically doesn't say that we can mandate that they live within city limits. It's just that we can have them to have it a reasonable response time, and we can dictate that response time.
I think the last time that it caused an issue, they ruled that like a supervisor role could be restricted, but the other ones have to be
reasonable, which makes that bigger float cloud not restricted so much. So I think it's a case by case basis, like case law for us, that it could
So,
change it.
I guess, I mean, you tell me what kind of what you would like to see and I can adjust it. I just think we need to adjust it to something that is more what's happening versus what's, you know, the 10 air miles, because very few of us are actually compliant with it.
25 years ago, you had to be within the city limits. And
Right.
I understand, things
Yeah.
have changed. But,
Yeah,
I mean, a previous city clerk lived 2 miles out of town and she had to move into the city limits. And it just, I don't know, I'm just, the 30-mile range, I'm not comfortable with. For everybody.
No, I'm not either. I'll just be upfront, I am not, and that's why I voted, and I explained it to George, that's why I voted no on the top. That's way too far away for our employees to be living for when we need them. And it's just, there's too many variables that get it put in place, so.
That's what we want in reality, I guess.
I just think that, if I could talk real quick, I just think that we have to have some type of policy in place, because if we're not compliant with the policy that we have now, we're not enforcing that policy, so technically.
That's because we've been too loose on it,
We've
we need
thrown
to
that
enforce
policy
it.
out for the last 3 years, 4 years.
Yeah,
Correct.
we have one city employee that wasn't in the area that he was supposed to be, and then moved further away. And we let it happen, and we shouldn't be doing that.
And I think, yeah, I just had that conversation.
So, I mean,
We'll just move
Okay.
on. Okay, we have to consider the pay application number 9 to Sandy.
yep.
Motion
So,
approved.
I'll make it.
Second.
I have a question on these pay applications, and is our engineering firm actually reviewing what's going on out there?
well, they, according to what they agreed to do, for the amount that they agreed to do, is that they did some inspections, so I've received inspection reports. And they're actually basically almost to what their limit spending was, so I think their contract was like for $70,000 worth of work. And I think we're at up to what, 68,000 that we've paid out to B&K, so.
Where are we at financially with this community center project? Where are we drawing the funds from now?
We're still within our budget of what was approved, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's where you're going, right? Is that your question?
Well, I mean, I've
Fundraising and whatnot.
We haven't been doing anything.
Well, I mean, I've done all the grant reimbursements that, to date, that I can do. The one grant that we haven't gotten for, reimbursed on is the bioretention cells, because they are not complete. So they haven't paid out on that, so that expenditure hasn't been reimbursed yet. We've gotten the $375,000 for, the Iowa Great Places grant. I just submitted the CAT grant was $240,000. I know we've gotten better than 50% of that grant, and I've applied, they will only, the balance of that grant, they will only pay out when it's actually complete. I think that the Hometown Pride Committee has gotten some more donations in. I haven't requested another reimbursement from them since early on in the construction phase.
So we should be getting, I mean, their money we should be spending their money first, basically.
Right,
Once
and
we get to that
I need to apply, I mean, there's some of the like the tables and chairs invoices that haven't come in yet, I was gonna send those to the Hometown Pride Committee to get reimbursement on those. I think the last time I knew that they probably had a little over 100,000 in their cash bucket in their account to be able to reimburse on, so I don't know, we should have.
We should be getting that reimbursed for whatever they got without draining their account to zero, but close to zero, because
Right.
we're the ones that are giving up other projects, a well, for example, and we need to utilize that fundraising money first,
Yep.
in our money, and then, And I'll second the motion, sorry it's taking so long, but we gotta pay the bill. And we're, as long as we aren't going over what we've already authorized.
Roll call.
Stankham,
Yes.
Beckman,
Yes.
Frank,
No,
Waltman.
Yes.
Okay, our partnership with BV,
And this is a no cost to the city. Actually, George brought it to my attention a while ago, and we sent an email off to the gal at BV, and this really is just it's a strategic partnership that, you know, they can use maybe our name and on some stuff, and it provides a small benefit to the employees if they were to utilize BV University, you know, maybe a little bit of a discount, being a strategic partner.
so we need a motion on the.
so it's no cost to us, it's
There's
just a
no cost to
matter of.
us, no.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Beckman,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
Stankham,
Yes.
Waltman.
Yes.
Okay, business development improvement grant with Jeff Pringle and Corral, that's at 5,000 facade.
Well, it's
I got-
not a facade, that's just a,
Signage, was it?
Signage?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
I got a question on his building permit.
There's no building.
No, this is
Well-
this is just his grant request.
All right, for the facade then. He's talking about putting a roll-up door on the east side of that building.
Remove the
Right.
canopy and new roll-up door is what it says here, with new lights above it.
What's that gonna create? I mean, where do you think, George? Is it gonna open up a bucket of worms, people out on the sidewalk and,
Yeah, we also gotta make sure that their alcohol permit, if they leave that door open, where does that draw a line of ABD for licensing of outdoors versus indoors too? Because we had that issue with Sip and Sample that they brought all their beer outside and didn't have an alcohol, let's say, outdoor permit. So, talk about issues, yes, we're always gonna have issues there. A glass roll-up door, I could see somebody going through it, but,
Well,
other than that.
It'd be nice to know if they're gonna build something on the inside to stop people from sitting. I mean, I see all kinds of places where they have the roll-up doors, they roll them up, and there's like a bar height level there where they can sit and look out at the main street. But we're not seeing any of that in this plan. I think we need more of a description
Yeah, I
of
was
what
hoping he
is.
was gonna be here tonight to
Yeah.
answer some questions, but,
Yeah.
Because I'm in favor of the grant thing for him, but we need to know.
So do you wanna table this and let me see if he can come in and have a talk with y'all?
I think so.
I would prefer
Yeah,
that.
cause that roll-up door, what's the purpose of it?
Well, I see purposes of them all the time. A lot of places have them, but it's not on the sidewalk. It might be in 10 feet and they have a little outdoor sitting area. They roll up the door, so now it opens up the inside of the bar to the outside of the bar when the weather permits. I totally get the door, but they're not right at the sidewalk where if I'm sitting there and I walk by and
You hand
I'm
it-
15
you
years
hand
old
it-
and hey, give me a
drink to
beer,
minor
sit there,
standing
grab
outside
it,
the corner.
grab it and go. I don't think we want them
I have
opportunities here.
reservations on it.
And I talked to ABD for Sip and Sample, and their rules are getting stricter, just so you know, they're coming down. Because places are doing that, and they're going outside that boundary. Because I talked about doing like a ribbon cutting, and I'm like, oh, remember back in the day when we used to have street dances? No more.
Yeah, so you see
Really strict
these
now.
roll-up doors in Vegas a lot there. But there you can walk down the street with a beer.
Yeah,
Doesn't
exactly.
Auburn have one on the street side?
I don't think
Maybe theirs is only in the back.
out back they do,
Out back.
Yeah, theirs is out
to
back.
their outdoor area.
Right, it's fenced, it's barricaded in though.
It's a good idea, but it's not a good idea to search the sidewalk.
Correct, yeah.
So we'll
So,
wait till we get him here to tell us what he's gonna do.
all right.
We'll move on to the IDED application on the catalyst grant.
Well, then I guess you might as well wait on this one too, I mean, cause if the idea of the application, so this is the catalyst grant, so the city has to have buy-in, and how much buy-in do we want? So until you probably have a conversation with him about what his plans are and ideas, that might curtail some of that as well, so.
Okay, let's move on to the draft development of housing 20. Oh, that's 20?
I had Dave review it, I gave it to Brandy, I haven't had any discussions with Brandy, but, apparently I've heard through the grapevine that the developer might have a few issues, so I don't know what those issues are. But I will have to have a conversation and see if I can get that figured out, and go from there.
In
So,
this-
this wasn't the design to have this approved tonight, this was just to give you, a discussion and have you see the draft.
Okay, so in this, and I briefly read this, so I apologize, but does it state in here somewhere for him putting the infrastructure in, and I'll use this street as an example, it has to meet that, whatever we were talking about?
Specifications.
The American Iron
I
Works.
didn't see that listed. I saw
Okay.
city zoning and city, but I never saw like the specs for the.
Right, that's what what's that
So-
word?
SUDA spec, right?
But
Sudis.
it doesn't necessarily say SUDAS expectations, but it
There
says
you go.
that we would have, the developer agrees to cause the construction of the infrastructure project, with the timeline and specifications set forth in Exhibit C. Prior to constructing infrastructure, the developer will submit copies of all engineering documents related to the proposed infrastructure project to the city, and the city may request reasonable changes to ensure compliance with any applicable ordinances or regulations.
Okay, so can we put that writing in there, so it's in the development agreement that he has to meet whatever that word is, I can't pronounce it,
SUDA
sorry.
spec.
To the spec, and we don't want the street being 15 foot wide or 20 foot wide, it needs to be that 33 foot wide for emergency access, wide enough to move snow.
6 inch
Right, but that's in that
specifications,
SUDA.
depth wise also, because I know that out on the east end landing or whatever you wanna call
Right.
it, that wasn't done to our specs.
I just think it should be in our agreement to start with before we're signing something that he comes back and then now we're this far down the road. No, let's get it up front right away.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
I don't know if we got it in our ordinance, how wide a street has to be and how thick it has to be, but I think we need to put it in there if it isn't.
Well, as long as it meets, the SUDA specifications
Right.
for street construction, yeah, I will have to look at that.
Okay, budget work session.
Was there anything else in there that anybody had any major concern on?
I honestly, Teresa, I
Okay,
haven't
well
read it
then,
all,
Yeah,
and if I see something, I'll let you
Okay.
know, but I don't know about Dave or anybody else. I just haven't had the time to read it, sorry.
well, we aren't doing anything with the budget,
Okay,
we'll leave that till next week.
do you have any questions? Otherwise, I have a motion to
Well,
adjourn.
can we talk about that budget work session just a minute?
Sure.
Because I know I won't be here next week, and the topic of our water infrastructure needs to be a high priority in our budget, I believe. I don't know what everybody else's thoughts are on that. If we have to cut something, we have to cut something. Make sure we get water to our city. Does that make sense? And I want you guys to know my opinion before next week, because I will not be able to call in and do so.
Next week, but by far won't be the final
I
decision.
know, but I don't wanna get us too far down, just so you know my opinion.
I definitely think we need to work on infrastructure before we start buying anything else.
Well, or doing anything else, the infrastructure's gotta be our number one priority.
Yeah, this water thing.
That's my opinion, I wanna make sure you guys know my opinion, I guess that's all I'm saying.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
I'll second it.
meeting adjourned.
I just told them.